Despite being generally considered to be quite bad, sometimes burn or heal effects can win you matches by themselves. In this video, we'll be going over some of the more notable examples of cards being played exclusively due to that. First, let's start off with Firecracker, a card which received a lot of attention when the new time rules were first implemented. This is a level 4 Fire Fiend monster which can, as a quick effect, discard itself to burn your opponent for 1000 points of damage, but then you skip your next draw phase. It also has an effect on field where it gets a counter every time your opponent takes effect damage and then removes all the counters to inflict the render damage to your opponent for each tier in the end phase. Let's quickly go over how the time rules work so it's clear why such a bad card ever saw play. Right now, in competitive Yu-Gi-Oh!, when the time allotted for your match is over, what happens is the current turn player gets to continue up until the end phase they're on. And then the game ends and whoever has the most life points wins. Or if both players have the same, it's a draw. So for example, if time on the round is called while you're inside your main phase, the game will end together as soon as it does. It doesn't matter if you have a full board of beaters and they have nothing. If your opponent has higher life points than you do at the end of the phase, they will win the game. These time rules are very controversial within the community and have led to really contentious situations in tournament play. One time, someone even got banned from Konami events for talking about how often he'd win in time by using Gaga Cowboy. There was also one iconic match where time was about to be called, and the turn player had cleared all interactions from their opponent's board and was about to move into the battle phase. However, when he declared he was going to try to move to the battle phase, the opponent thought for a while before uselessly activating his Borolo Dragon's effect to make a face-up monster lose 500 attack and defense, which took up enough time to make time end while it was still the main phase. This sealed the game for the player with the Borolo Dragon, who had a life point lead. Firecracker was seen as one of the first generic ways to abuse how the time rules worked, since if the match drags on to the point where there's not enough time for game 3 to even reach the battle phase, you can just discard this card and then win the best of 3 for yourself. But while people did think it'd be a mainstay for a while, people usually preferred to play more easily accessible ways to burn that didn't require you to hard draw into them, like Gaga Cowboy for example, who has an effect to burn for 800 points of damage, and only requires any 2 level 4 monsters to bring him out of the extra deck. The ability to be used during either player's turn is great, but not enough to take up 3 side deck slots over other staples that will help you win in more situations. With all that said, this card actually managed to secure itself a topping spot in the list as recently as this year, because MathMech decks can actually search it somewhat consistently with Prime MathMech Albertium's 3 material effect. While this card didn't make that big of an impact, we've seen a slight rise in popularity of hand traps which can also win you the game on time, even if they're not meant for only that. Ghost Mortar and Moonlit Chill has always been one of the less used Ghost Curl hand traps. Ghost Mortar has the effect where if your opponent spell summons a monster, it can discard itself to target and negate the effects of that monster, but it also inflicts burn damage equal to its attack if it leaves the field. This card was often seen as a worse effect veiler, since it has to be triggered on summon and it's also a hard once per turn. So for a long time, no one would be playing Mortar unless they were already maxed out on veilers. On top of that, Effect Veiler itself is a worse infinite impermanence, so you'd probably maxing out on that one first. However, in recent times, we've seen lists opting to play Mortar over both of these other cards. But while the burn effect does play a large role in why, it's still much better outside of time than every other card we'll be talking about. It has the niche over Veiler in that it can be used outside the main phase, so quick play starters can't play around it, and the perk over impermanence in that it's also a no material if you're nearing time, or if you can remove their monster yourself, it's a straight up win condition. However, things are even more extreme for the last yokai girl to be printed. Ghost Sister and Spooky Dogwood. This hand trap can discard itself to make it so that you gain life points equal to the attack of every monster your opponent summons during the main phase and battle phase until the end of the turn. This card is played essentially the same way Firecracker was, as you just chain it in an effect that would special summon a monster, like Gigantic Sprite or Teal-Limit Shiren, to get higher life points in time. Spooky Dogwood was very widely panned on release, as it didn't actually impact your opponent's plays unlike cards like Ash Blossom or Ghost Spell did, which had been on the meta for a couple of years by then. There were comparisons to be made with Maxi, as this is another card that technically punishes your opponent for overextending, but you can't really compare gaining card advantage with Maxi to gaining a life lead with Spooky Dogwood. The usual logic was that if your opponent had made a board strong enough to keep you from playing for a turn, odds are they could handle the extra draw phase or 2 this could give you. While this logic was true for the longest time, it's gone out the window in the most couple of recent formats. Spooky Dogwood is now a staple side deck hand trap, which you'd very likely see in many topping list of any given modern tournament. A couple of months ago, it was because the danger tier limit decks took forever to execute their combos, which made going into time very likely. Then there was Runic Sprite, which skips all its battle phases and can't really close the game while being on top of card advantage. Now the problem has reached its apex with this yugioh Tearlaments hitting the West. This is an extremely technical deck with a really difficult mirror match, in which both players are playing during each other's turn due to all of the in-engine hand traps and can create chains and go as high as chain link 12. The issue with time is so bad with this deck that, despite there being extra time for matches that happen during Top Cut, many of the finals went into time playing the mirror anyways. Now let's talk about some more specific techs for winning on time. Red Resonator is a level 2 Fire Fiend tuner which can, when it's normal summon, special summon a level 4 or lower monster from your hand. Also, when it's special summon, you can target one face-up monster in the field and gain life points equal to its attack. Red Resonator has seen some play before this year as a generic tuner extender in decks that just wanted to spam the field, such as Dark Synchro. But it's really coming to the spotlight now as a guaranteed one of in every single Sprite side deck. This card can be special summoned straight from the deck with Gigantic Sprite, but it's also fine to draw it since you can link it off and then use Sprite Elf to bring it back. Red Resonator plays an even bigger role in Runic Sprite variants though. The Runic archetype revolves around giving you powerful spell interruptions with insane draw power through their field spell, at the cost of getting up your next battle phase whenever you use one of your spells. Since just using one of your engine pieces skips your battle phase, you're highly likely to go into time with Runic, especially if you have an opponent who doesn't want to surrender. A really stubborn player can just stay in on a clearly lost game which you cannot finish due to your Runic cards and force the game into time as soon as a game 2 out of a best out of 3. This is especially bad for you since the Sprite engine will make you lose life points with Sprite Starter. All of this makes the deck have to side in the Red Resonator almost every game past the first, even if there's still plenty of time on the clock, just not to have a win foiled by an opponent who won't give up. Another interesting thing about this card is that it actually has a gimmicky almost FTK associated with it. Number 43, Manipulator of Souls, is a rank 2 Xyz, which, when you gain life points, can deal the same amount of burn damage to your opponent. So, if you can get Red Resonator to special summon a Sprite Gamma Burst boosted Gigantic Sprite with an extra deck monster under it, you can deal a bit over 4,000 damage to your opponent, and then revive Red Resonator with Sprite Elf during their turn to deal the remaining amount. But of course, this clunky setup has never really seen any competitive play. On the other side of the meta, Tearlaments have gone through quite some developments when it comes to winning in time already. Gagaga Cowboy has of course been a staple in it in every deck that goes into rank 4s, but let's go over some more unique options. In more combo-based variants which relied hugely on dangers and other generic extenders to turbo out Curious Lightsworn Dominion for its amazing mill effect, we saw the rise of Skullmark Ladybug. This is a level 4 Earth Insect monster which simply increases your life points by 1000 points when it's sent to the graveyard in any way. Its usage is simple enough, you just need to open a way into Curious, or your Foolish Burial, or just luckily blind mill into it to win on time. The only issue with this approach is that these variants all ran Pot of Desires, which banishes the top 10 cards of your deck to let you draw 2, or Gizmeko Rochi, which can banish 8 cards from the top of your deck face down to summon itself, both of which could banish your Ladybug by mistake and prevent your win if you got unlucky. This led to some top players switching to Agave Dragon instead. This is a Link 4 monster which takes 2+ monsters except tokens as materials. When it's Link summoned, you get some minor effects depending on the amount of monsters of a certain type in your graveyard. Namely, you deal 100 burn for each dragon, have Agave gain 200 attack for each dinosaur, make all your opponent's monsters lose 300 attack for each sea serpent, and then finally you can gain 400 life points for each worm. The synergy comes from the fact that when any of the Tearlament girls are sent to the graveyard by card effect, you can use their effects to fusion summon Muddragon of the Swamp, a worm monster, as long as you have another non-aqua dark monster available in your hand, graveyard, or field. This is of course trivial in decks with high amounts of dangers, and other countless good generic darks. This turned this very meh generic Link 4, that was actually my video on the top 10 worst Link monsters, into a side deck staple. The latest advancement came with the release of Sprite Sprint. This is a Link 2, which can be made with any 2 monsters, including one level 2, rank 2, or Link 2 monster, and gets to send any level 2 monster from your deck to the graveyard when it's brought out. This is a really useful card for both Sprite and Tier, as they both have amazing targets they really want to hit the graveyard. Since Sprint is now a staple, this has led to the rise of Volcanic Scattershot as an option. This is a level 2 Pyro monster which deals 500 damage to your opponent when it's sent to the graveyard. Also, if it's sent there by the effect of Blaze Accelerator, you can mill 2 other Scattershots from your hand or deck to the graveyard to destroy all monsters your opponent controls. Once upon a time, the Raigeki effect when comboed with Blaze Accelerator Reload was the main feature of this card, with the burn just being a small added bonus. But now, it's the other way around. While Sprint exists and is as easy as it is to summon, this will continue to be a very clear solution for time and round. But while this one could technically be used for both top decks now, most sprites continue to stick with Red Resonator since it works better with the engine anyways. Still, with the release of the new Ishizu cards, we're now seeing more diversity within the Tearlament's burn win con again. While Scattershot is still always readily accessible, we've seen a small resurgence of Skullmark Ladybug, because both you and your opponent will be milling cards in the mirror, and while the Ladybug can't be accessed directly, it gives more life points than a scattershot burns for, letting you walk away with a life lead. The issue with time is so rampant with these cards that one of the top 4 players of a recent YCS actually played a full playset of skull-marked ladybugs on his side deck, and even said it was one of his most consistently cited cards. Even if you go as far back as the so-called Eternal format, where Sky Striker, Salamangreat, Thunder Dragon, and Orcus dominated, you can see that Konami was already keen on printing some easy ways for decks to snatch a match. Sky Striker Ace Kaina was by far the most well-known one, as she gives you 100 life points after activate a Sky Striker spell card, and Striker has always been a deck which often goes into time, since it has trouble closing out games. Still, Kaina is actually useful outside of time, but the same cannot be said for the options Salamangreat decks use. Salamangreat Paro is a level 5 Fire Cyberus monster who you've probably never seen before. This card has some irrelevant battle-related effects, but most importantly, it can tribute itself to let you gain 2,000 life points, and is easily searched with Salamangreat Mirage Stalio, which almost any hand can go into. Now, let's finish this video by going over a couple of other interesting options which people have ran. Psychic Life Transfer is a level 7 Psychic Synchro monster, which lets you remove from play 1 Psychic monster from your graveyard to gain 1,200 life points. This card helps show up one of the awful weaknesses of adventure punk decks. Your main starter, Zia Min, makes you pay 600 life points, essentially being unactivatable in time. However, there was also an argument for playing Dark Strike Fighter. Dark Strike Fighter lets you tribute a monster to inflict damage to your opponent equal to its level in the field times 200. The pre-errata form of this card was a powerful OTK enabler, since it was not a hard once per turn as it is now, but it tributing itself deals 1400 damage, which is still enough to win, and you can even do it under Dimension Shifter unlike Life Transfer. Scarlet Red Dragon Archfiend is one that has seen play for many reasons through the years. This is a level 8 Dark Dragon Synchro, which takes any tuner and non-tuner monster to make. Its name becomes Red Dragon Archfiend on the field or in the graveyard, and once per turn, it lets you destroy as many effect monsters in the field as possible, with attack less than or equal to Scarlight's, and then do 500 damage to your opponent for each monster destroyed. Guard Dragon decks could abuse this very easily back when Guard Dragon Aggro Pain was still legal, since it can cheat it out straight from the extra deck. Similarly, Virtual World decks get to do the same thing with Ultimate Zilkin for the same effect. And last but not least, of course, Dragon Link can easily go into this with their main starter, Rocket Tracer, which represents a level 8 Synchro monster by itself. Recently, a branded Pile deck has topped running 2 Performapal cards as their burn engine for time. Performapal Gatling Ghoul is a level 8 Dark Fiend Fusion monster which takes a Performapal monster and a level 5 or higher Dark monster as its materials. If it's fusion summoned, you get to inflict 200 damage to your opponent for each card in the field, then you can destroy one monster your opponent controls and inflict burn damage equal to its original attack if it was fusion summoned using a Pendulum monster as material. Essentially, they can get into this card by using Branded Fusion to send Fallen of Albaz and the least worst light attribute Performapal monster they want in their deck to go into Albion the Branded Dragon. Albion can then let you perform another fusion summon by banishing materials from your hand or grave, so you can banish itself and the 5 Rainbow Magician to make Gatling Gun. It's incredible that someone using a deck with easy access to Masquerade the Blazing Dragon, which burns your opponent for doing any action, still wanted to include this small Performapal engine just because of the end of match procedures. While the new time rules have not made the game devolve into activating sparks and stall for 40 minutes like some people thought it would, you can clearly see why it's a sour spot in the community when it makes all kinds of bad cards see play. Nowadays, it's only a question of what will be the next pack filler to see play, just because it has some slight synergy with whatever are the top engines in the meta at the moment. In this video, we'll be looking at the cards which give you the biggest amount of life points a single time, with cards that are essentially not repeatable after you use them once. And at number 10, we have Morphtronic Telephon. This is a level 1 tuner which has the effect where if it's in attack position, you can roll a 6-sided die in order to gain life points equal to the result times 100. Then special summon a Morphtronic monster from your graveyard, which has a level less than or equal to the result. So if you roll a 6, you get to gain 600 life points. Now, while this may not seem very impressive, anyone who's played competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! Should immediately figure out why this card is on this list. You see, its first effect is what we call a soft once per turn, which means if the card is removed from the field or flipped face down, and then comes back, you can use the effect again. Or if you have 3 copies of the card on board, each copy will be able to use the effect once. So, if you have a way to bring back Morphtronic Telephon to the field over and over, you can actually gain a whole bunch of life points in one turn. And there's one card which is able to bring back Morphtronic Telephon from the graveyard multiple times a turn. And that card is a second copy of Morphtronic Telephon. Because you see, Telephon is a level 1 Morphtronic monster, and Telephon neglects to exclude other copies of itself from its first effect. So, no matter what result you roll, you will always be able to summon another copy of Morphtronic Telephon from your graveyard. So if you simply have a way to keep using your Morphtronic Telephon on the field in order to send it to the graveyard, with, say, something like a Link Summon, then you'd be able to use the effect multiple times in a single turn. Or if you simply have something like Cannon Soldier, you can even FTK your opponent by bringing back Morphtronic Telephon over and over. But if you simply use them for link summons, you can easily gain over 5,000 life points by just going through a combo. A combo that you can generally only do once per duel, because you'll simply run out of extra monsters to do it again on your next turn. But technically, you can use Morphtronic Telephon's effect every turn. So it's at number 10 simply because it can be repeated. And at number 9, we have Supremacy Berry. This card simply has the ability where if your life points are lower than your opponent's, you gain 2,000 life points. However, if your life points are higher than your opponent's, you instead take 1,000 damage. Now, anyone who plays Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Links should be very familiar with this card, or at the very least, very early Duel Links. You see, in Duel Links, there are a series of skills which allow you to do extra things outside of your deck, and a lot of these skills are based on how many life points you have. In one of the earliest meta decks, there was a skill called 3-star Demotion, which once per turn allowed you to pay 2,000 life points in order to reduce the levels of all monsters in your hand by 3 for the turn, which basically meant you got to normal summon a level 7 monster without tributes. And since the starting life point value in Duel Links is only 4,000, this means you'd only be able to use this skill a single time per duel, unless you had a way to gain some life points. And Supremacy Berry would allow you to use it for basically every Supremacy Berry you drew thereafter, since the skill itself would basically make sure you had less life points than your opponent, and would also allow you to pay for the skill multiple times throughout a duel. Eventually, 3-star Demotion got nerfed into the ground, but there were still other skills in the game which required life point totals to be at weird values. Supremacy Berry was used with skills like Ojama Go in order to create tokens on your opponent's side of the field in order to stall them out, and also with the Destiny Draw, which allowed you to draw any card in your deck every time you lost exactly 2,000 or more life points, but only once per turn. So with Supremacy Berry, you could use the effect more than once per duel. Eventually though, all of these skills got nerfed, and there isn't really a way to take advantage of Supremacy Berry in modern Duel Links. And obviously, Supremacy Berry never saw play in actual Yu-Gi-Oh! Because the effect is just sadly not impactful enough to do anything there. And at number 8, we have Draining Shield. This is a battle trap, which allows you to negate an attack and then gain life points equal to that monster's attack who declared the attack. So if your opponent has a really strong monster at the side of the field, you can gain a whole bunch of life points with this one effect. Additionally, there are ways in order to make sure you gain even more from this. There's a card in the game called Massive Morph, which allows you to double the attack and defense of one of your opponent's monsters, but that monster can no longer attack you directly. This attack gain is permanent, so if you give your opponent a really strong monster like Lava Golem, it will now have 6,000 attack, which means you can gain 6,000 life points if you stop that attack with your Draining Shield. You can go even further though, as there's a card called Casamolar, which can cause a monster to gain attack equal to its original attack. So if you use Casamolar and Lava Golem and then Massive Morph, it will have 12,000 attack, which means you gain 12,000 life points from a Draining Shield. And this was kind of the strategy used in Duel Links, and was such an effective strategy in the game that Massive Morph is still limited to 1 copy in Duel Links to this day. Although Casamolar was never really used in Duel Links combos, as I'm not even sure if that card is in the game yet. There are other cards like Draining Shield that will allow you to double up on giving your opponent huge amounts of attacks with Massive Morph. There's also Enchanted Javelin, which allows you to gain life points equal to the attack of an attacking monster. However, if the attack is direct, it's basically just stopping the attack by getting life points back that you're about to lose. So you only gain life points from Enchanted Javelin if you use it when they're attacking a defensive position monster or a monster which doesn't take battle damage. There's also Damage Vaccine Omega Max, which allows you to gain life points equal to the damage or card effect damage you take. Rainbow Life, which allows you to gain life points equal to the damage you would have taken. And then there's Nutrient Z, which allows you to gain 4,000 life points if you would take 2,000 more points of battle damage. And out of all of these cards, Draining Shield is easily the best of the bunch, because it also negates the attack instead of only giving you life points. And also it doesn't have a discard cost like Rainbow Life, which would have been the best one if it wasn't for that cost. However, since this is a battle trap, it's astronomically too slow for modern Yu-Gi-Oh! And is kind of a newbie card that seems better than it really is, which is why Draining Shield is only at number 8. And at number 7, we have Joruri Punk Dangerous Gabu. This is a trap card which can negate the effect of a monster until the end of the turn. And also, if you control a punk monster, you can additionally gain life points equal to that monster's attack. However, it only increases your life points by that monster's original attack, so you can't do fun combos like Massive Morph in order to gain a whole bunch of life points. But unlike Draining Shield, Dangerous Gabu is actually useful, because it's part of the punk archetype. You see, the punk archetype is a very good engine that fits into pretty much any deck. It allows you to easily go into rank 8 monsters, level 8 synchros, and level 11 synchros, and a whole bunch of other things, all without a normal summon, assuming you draw into an emergency teleport or a deer note in your hand. However, one of the punk monsters, Joruri Punk Madam Spider, has the ability to pay 600 life points to add a punk trap card from your deck to your hand. So if your combo goes into Spider, you can then search out Dangerous Gabu and easily have access to this negate. And of all of the punk spells and traps, Gabu does actually see some competitive play with them, because generally speaking, being able to negate one of your opponent's monsters is actually a good effect. In fact, this is probably the best card on this list in terms of modern Yu-Gi-Oh! However, this list is about rating based off of burst of life points, and sadly, most punk engine combos don't end on a punk monster. They generally go into generic Synchro or Xyz monsters. So if you do get access to Gabu, chances are you won't even gain the life points associated to it, and you just use it to negate an effect, which is not what this list is about. And at number 6, we have Gizmek Okami, the dreaded Deluge Dragon. This is a level 10 monster with really high stats, which can special summon itself from your hand if there are 2 or more special summon monsters from the extra deck on the field, counting both yours and your opponent's. Then, while it's on the field, you can pay 1500 life points to destroy all monsters on the field that were special summoned from the extra deck, but you can only attack with one monster for the rest of this turn. So the conditions to bring this card out are to have a lot of extra deck monsters in the field already. So ideally, if your opponent has 2 or more out, Deluge Dragon will be able to wipe them all out. So it has a really good effect, even if its summon conditions are kind of strict. However, the reason it's on this list is for its last effect, where if this card is sent from the field to the graveyard by your opponent, you can banish one monster from your opponent's graveyard to then gain life points equal to its attack. So if you send one of your opponent's big, strong extra deck monsters to the graveyard with its effect, you can then banish one of those cards in order to gain a whole bunch of life points. However, since it's only the original attack of the monster, chances are you won't gain more life points than something like Draining Shield, or you can manipulate the totals better. But this is a life point gain effect tied to a pretty good generic main deck monster, which will actually be able to do something useful on top of giving you a bunch of life points, which is why it makes this list and even kind of high at number 6. And at number 5, we have Side Effects. This is a trap card which requires your opponent to declare how many cards they wish to draw from their deck, minimum of 1 up to 3. And based on how many cards they decide to draw, you gain 2,000 life points per card. So if your opponent draws the maximum amount, you gain 6,000 life points with this one card, which is how many life points will be gained in the example of Draining Shield, stopping a massive morphed up lava golem, which is a huge amount. Probably one of the biggest amounts you can get generically from a card on this list without having to jump through too many hoops. However, the downside is that your opponent gets to draw 3 cards, which is kind of huge. This card literally puts you at -4 in card advantage, so you better have a way to take advantage of those life points that you just gained. But what's really funny about Side Effects is that most players will only ever draw 1 card from the effect, so it's only a -2 most of the time, which isn't as insurmountable as a -4. Now, you might be wondering why that is. If you had the option to draw 1 to 3 cards, naturally, you would always want to draw 3 cards, because drawing is one of the best effects in Yu-Gi-Oh! Because of its lack of a resource system. Those 3 cards could be hand traps, starters, more extenders, or more ways to draw even more cards. It is just incredibly disadvantageous to let your opponent to draw so many cards. So why is it that so many people only ever draw 1 card when you use Side Effects on them? Well, because if you're hitting your opponent with a card that's giving them a seemingly really good advantage for just giving you life points, they're going to get really cautious about why you're giving them such a really good deal to only gain life points. And because so many people are so untrusting of their opponent, they will pick the minimum amount almost every time, even though life point values don't really matter in competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! That's why most life point gain effects are really bad, because unless they do something else like Deluge Dragon or Dangerous Gabu, they're just not worth running. So it's really funny that a majority of players that you use Side Effects against will only ever draw a single card off of it, because they just inherently do not trust what you're going to do with those extra life points. Or at least that's my experience whenever I use the card in Master Duel, which always surprises me, because I just assume people would always want to draw 3 cards no matter what. And at number 4, we have Try and Guess. This is a trap card which has the effect to gain 3,000 life points. However, with a twist, you have to declare an extra deck card type between Fusion, Synchro, and Xyz, and then both players reveal their extra decks. And whichever player has more cards of the declared type will gain 3,000 life points. So as long as your deck is just full of fusion monsters, for example, chances are your opponent's deck is not going to be a full 15 fusion monster pile as well, and you can almost guarantee to gain life points this way, unless your opponent is playing something like a branded build that has 0 link monsters. Conversely, if you're playing a Nurse Burn deck, where you're converting your opponent's life point gains into damage, you can just fill your extra deck with nothing but link monsters in order to guarantee that your opponent will gain life points. because Link Monster is not one of the options that you're allowed to call, and it doesn't check for them. So as long as you know your opponent has at least one of the other 3 types in their extra deck at all, you'll be able to guarantee that they gain 3,000 life points, in order to make sure that they take 3,000 points of damage with bad reaction to Samachi's effect. And this is kind of a cornerstone of Nurse Burn decks, but it can also be used to give yourself 3,000 life points as well. And it's one of the highest amounts you can reliably give yourself from a single card that doesn't require any other combo cards, without too many other downsides. And at number 3, we have Destruct Potion. This is a trap card which allows you to gain life points equal to the attack of one monster on your side of the field. However, it also destroys the monster in order to gain those life points. Now, anyone who plays Master Duel probably recognizes this card, because it's used in an FTK by bots in order to win in one turn. The combo goes as follows. You go into number 99 Utopia Dragonar, use its effect to bring out number 100 Numeron Dragon, use Numeron Dragon's effect to gain 13,000 attack points, then on your opponent's turn, summon out number 43 Manipulator Souls, then use Destruct Potion in order to destroy your own Numeron Dragon to gain 13,000 life points, and Manipulator Souls has the ability where, once per turn, when you gain life points, you inflict that amount of life points as damage to your opponent as well. So you'll deal 13,000 points of damage to your opponent, which means you'll be able to win before your opponent enters their first main phase. Now, there is another card with this life point gain effect called Mystic Walk, which is a quick play spell which allows you to tribute a monster to gain life points equal to that monster's attack or defense, whichever one you choose. And it also works on the monster's current attack on the field, just like Destruct Potion. So technically can be used with the FTK as well. The reason Destruct Potion is more associated with this combo though, is because it's a trap card and 10 times easier to search than Mystic Walk. So other copies of Trap Trick or even Trap Track allow you to start a Destruct Potion in order to make this FTK as consistent as possible. But you can also just play 3 copies of Mystic Walk to guarantee that you get the effect, because it's a quick play spell card. So it can also be used during your opponent's turn in order to pull off the combo. And really, this combo is the ultimate way in order to take advantage of gaining a whole bunch of life points in one chunk. And since Destruct Potion is used in this FTK, it's kind of the king of this kind of effect. However, only because it works specifically with this FTK. We do have 2 other cards on this list that are ahead of it for different reasons. And at number 2, we have the Ascendant of Thunder. This is a level 7 monster which allows you to special summon from your hand by paying 3,000 life points. Additionally, if it's summoned this way and then it's destroyed by your opponent, you gain 5,000 life points, and neither of its effects are once per turn. So if you have 3 copies of this card in your hand, you can pay 9,000 life points to bring them all out. Well, as long as you have the extra life points to bring them out, that is. And then if it's destroyed, you gain 5,000 life points, netting you 2,000 life points total when you count its cost in order to be brought out. However, if we're looking at just the biggest chunk of life points you can gain without any other kinds of combos or setups, Ascendant of Thunder is one of the single largest amounts you can gain at 5,000, while also being a good card, unlike its counterpart, the Immortal Thunder, which only gave you 3,000 life points and made you lose 5,000 life points when it went to the graveyard. And the Ascendant of Thunder has actually seen competitive play, but not because of its ability to gain life points, and entirely because of its ability to be a generically special summonable level 7 from your hand, which only requires you to pay life points to bring it out, rather than having conditions, which is a lot more valuable than you would think. Most cards that can special summon themselves from the hand only do so under very strict conditions, those conditions usually involving their archetype in some way, but the Ascendant of Thunder only requires a life point cost, which means it can extend to any plays that need a level 7 monster on board for something. And at number 1, we have Performapal Karibobble. This is a hand trap which can only be activated when your opponent declares a direct attack, in which case you special summon this card from your hand and change the attack to this card instead. Then, if you take any battle damage from that battle, instead of taking life point damage, you gain that much life points. So it's kind of like Rainbow Life in a hand trap form. And remember how I said Rainbow Life would be much better than Draining Shield if it didn't have its cost? Well, this is basically what Karibobble is. You see, hand traps are infinitely more valuable than actual trap cards, because they're safe in your hand, and 10 times easier to use since you don't have to commit them to the board or wait a turn before using them. So while Karibobble and Draining Shield technically have a very similar effect of blinking one attack and gaining life points from it, Karibobble is better because it's a hand trap. So you'll actually be able to use the effect in a real duel, unlike Draining Shield, which will just get destroyed before the battle phase even begins. Also, hand traps are usable immediately as soon as you get them. So if you draw into Karibobble during the battle phase, like through the effect of Backup Squad, you'll be able to use it immediately during that battle phase, unlike Draining Shield, which would be stuck dead in your hand, waiting for you to set it on your next turn and then be usable on the turn after that. The fact that it's a hand trap with a really good effect just makes this card better than anything else that has a similar effect to it, and is also usable with all the same combos as Draining Shield, where you can Massive Morph and Casamolor the monster in order to double or quadruple the attack in order to gain a whole bunch of life points. Or if your opponent is using something like Blue Eyes Chaos Max Dragon, you could take advantage of the fact that this is a monster and summon it in defense position in order to take double piercing damage and gain nearly 8,000 life points without having to do anything else. So out of all the cards in this list, this is the easiest one to use, and will also gain you a whole bunch of life points. But it won't gain you the most amount of life points in a single burst that's entirely controlled by you, as that's probably still Destruct Potion with Numeron Dragon. If you really want to gain life points for whatever reason, generally the best way to go about it is to just stall and slowly gain life points every turn. So, what are the best cards that gain the most amount of life points every turn that are actually decent? This is the deck building hypothetical question we'll be answering in this video, for a question that generally doesn't come up because life point gain in general is pretty terrible. And at number 10, we have Sprite Elf. This one may surprise some people because the card itself doesn't actually have an effect to gain life points at all. This is a Link 2 monster which requires 2 monsters as materials, with at least one of them being a 2 monster, either a level, rank, or another Link 2. And it has the effect where, as a quick effect, you can special summon a level 2 monster from your graveyard, or if your opponent controls a monster, you can special summon a rank or Link 2 monster instead. The effect is a hard once per turn, and most importantly, does not negate the effects of the monster that it summons. So, if you have a red Resonator in your graveyard, you can special summon it with the effect of Sprite Elf, targeting Elf on the field, and gain 1400 life points with the effect of Red Resonator, which has the effect to gain life points equal to the attack of any one monster on the field when it's special summoned. Additionally, Red Resonator has a normal summon effect to special summon a level 4 or lower monster from your hand. So Red Resonator can actually help set up a Sprite Elf summon all by itself, then be brought back immediately with Sprite Elf to gain 1400 life points, or even more if there's a stronger monster on board, because it can target anything. And since Sprite Elf's effect is a quick effect, you can bring back Red Resonator during your opponent's turn to gain another 1400 life points. As long as you keep putting Red Resonator back into the graveyard, which I should mention is very easy since it's also a tuner, you can just keep bringing it back to gain a whole bunch of life points every turn. Out of all the cards in this list, this is probably the best way to gain the most amount of life points every turn in each player's turn. But the only reason it's so low on this list is because it's a 2-card combo, as neither of the cards can gain life points on their own. And you really need Sprite Elf in order to do this combo, which is a card that's currently banned in the TCG. Everything else on this list will actually be a little bit inferior to this combo, but they'll also be legal and probably a little bit more playable alongside Floodgates. And at number 9, we have Soul Absorption. This is a continuous spell which simply has the effect to gain 500 life points for each card that's banished. So, if you activate something like Pot of Desires, which banishes 10 cards from the top of your deck face down to draw 2, you can gain 5,000 life points. Or if you activate Eater of Millions to banish 15 cards from your extra deck, you can gain 7,500 life points. Or if you have Gizmek Orochi the Serpentron Sky Slasher and special summon it from the grave, you'll gain 4,000 life points. Basically, if you're playing a Grand Manju deck, you can gain an obscene amount of life points every turn with Soul Absorption, and you can do this every turn for any amount of banishes. If you have a deck that banishes a whole bunch of cards like Grand Manju decks regularly, then this is an easy way to easily double or triple your life points. However, there are so few decks that can actually take advantage of Soul Absorption, and the ones that can't actually search the card out. So if you're playing a deck that really wants to gain a massive amount of life points to use them for something, then you can't really rely on this card because it's only useful in very specific types of decks, and incredibly hard to actually get out of your deck in order to start using it. So it's unreliable at best and doesn't really help contribute to the win condition of Grand Manju, which is probably the best deck that can make use of it. So it's not even included in the deck that's able to use it the best because life point gain is just not needed in that deck at all. And at number 8, we have number XX Utopic Dark Infinity. This is a generic rank 10 monster with 4,000 attack and defense, which has the effect where once per turn, you can target another face-up special summon monster you control to gain life points equal to its original attack. So this is basically like Red Resonator, except it's able to use the effect every turn instead of only on a special summon. And it doesn't require to detach any of its materials like you normally would have to for effects like this on an Xyz monster. And that's because its actual detach effect is basically like Goyo Guardian, where it can special summon a monster distressed by battle by detaching one of its materials. So if you have another high attack monster in the field, you can target them to gain a ton of life points every turn. However, the problem with this card is specifically that it's a rank 10 monster. Rank 10 monsters are generally pretty hard to go into outside of the Mother Spider Splitter combo, because level 10 monsters are not easy to special summon. And there really isn't an archetype that can special summon level 10 monsters super easily, that can afford to go into Dark Infinity to start getting life points. Because generally, if you're going into rank 10s, you can just win the game instead by going into the Gustav Liebe combo. And even the Mother Spider Splitter combo can kind of win on its own through its own OTK, which is the only reason it's kind of low on this list. The effect to gain life points is really good for a list like this, but also kind of impractical to actually go into this monster. And at number 7, we have Eben's Son. This is a continuous spell card which has 3 effects. The important one is that if a face-up monster you control is destroyed by battle or card effect, you get to gain life points equal to its original attack, or original attacks plural, if multiple of your cards get destroyed at once with something like a Dark Hole. Additionally, its other effects are that if you summon a monster from your graveyard, you can give them 1000 attack, or if a spell or trap card is discarded from your hand, you can add one of them back to your hand. And each of its effects are hard once per turn. So, on a hard once per turn, you can gain life points equal to destroyed attack of some of your monsters. So if you simply crash one of your monsters into one of your opponents, you'll gain life points. And if it's destroyed in your opponent's turn, you'll gain life points. So it's one of the few cards which can gain life points during both players' turns. Now, the only real drawback to this card is it requires your monsters to get destroyed to gain the effect. But a really big upside is it doesn't require your opponent to destroy your cards, just simply that they are destroyed. So you can proc the effect with your own Dark Hole or Torrential Tribute, which makes this card actually allowed to be on this list because without the distinction, I don't think it would have been very good. But because it does work this way, it's a pretty decent card to gain some passive life points every turn. And it's a lot more usable than a card like Soul Absorption, which only works in very specific decks. Because in an average duel, your monsters are going to get destroyed whether you want them to or not. So it's much easier to set up this life point gain. Currently, this card is not in the TCG yet, and I don't expect it to make a huge splash when it does eventually arrive, unless you're really into life point gain cards. And at number 6, we have Humid Winds. This is a continuous trap where, if your life points are lower than your opponent's, you can gain 500 life points once per turn. And the effect does work on both players' turns. So it's an easy 500 life points every turn as long as you have lower life points than your opponent, which is a pretty easy condition to meet with its first effect, where you can also pay 1000 life points to add an aroma monster from your deck to your hand every turn. So the card basically allows you to go +1 and then gain life points. And aromas do have some pretty decent cards to search out, like if you want another card to gain life points every turn in the form of Aroma Jar, or if you want to draw cards every time you gain life points with Aromage Jasmine. But if you're trying to gain life points every turn in order to get a massive amount of life points, Humid Winds can't really contribute to that goal, unless your opponent also has a large amount of life points, which is the only thing keeping it back from being higher on this list, because it's actually one of the better cards on this list in general because it's just a free +1 every turn. And at number 5, we have number 49 Fortune Tune. This is a generic rank 3 monster with the effect to gain 500 life points during each of your standby phases. Additionally, it can't be targeted by card effects, and if it would be destroyed, you can detach one of its materials instead. Also, if it's sent from the field to the grave, you can shuffle 2 level 3 monsters from your graveyard back into your deck in order to return this card from your graveyard back to your extra deck, which is actually a pretty decent form of recursion, of getting your resources back into your deck without having to spend another resource to do so. And since the card can't be targeted, it's great to go into if you're just trying to get a quick Zeus, by attacking into something and protecting itself with its detach effect, then having a 2 material Zeus after. So the card actually does see some competitive play because it can be used to go into Zeus for level 3s. And also it's kind of hard to get rid of since it can't be targeted. So you can just comfortably leave it in defense position for a few turns in order to gain life points. But it does have a really low defense point value at only 900. So unless you're using digit jamming to make 900 a premium defense point value, it's not going to be walling off any major threats. And that's really the thing keeping this card from being higher on this list. It's just too easy to be destroyed by battle, so it's not going to stick around that long. And at number 4, we have Neospatian Air Hummingbird. This card has the effect to gain 500 life points for each card in your opponent's hand. So if you use this on turn 1, you can gain 2500 life points right off the bat, which is actually a pretty huge amount of life points to gain from one card. And this effect can just be used every turn, as long as your opponent has any cards in their hand. So if your opponent just has one card in hand, this is still as much life points every turn as using Fortune Tune, or if they have 2 cards, that's the same as having Humid Winds give you life points during yours and your opponent's turn. If you have some way to refill your opponent's hand because you're trying to deck them out by giving them a bunch of cards in their hand, you can gain even more life points. Although the main problem with this card is that it has very low stats, and it does take up your normal summon or resources to special summon it from other places, which thankfully it does have really good support in order to bring it out from the deck or graveyard. Although even with a whole bunch of cards to bring this card out from your deck, it's still just not very good on its own, and you have to have some way to protect it with Floodgates, or a Moon Mirror Shield, or Digit Jamming, unlike something like a Dark Infinity, which has really high stats and also just gains life points every turn. The biggest benefit it has over something like Dark Infinity is not requiring other special summon monsters, and of course being 10 times easier to bring out to the field, while also still gaining a decent chunk of life points every turn. And at number 3, we have Freezing Fire. This is a level 3 monster that can special summon itself from your hand if either player gains life points. Then it has a trigger effect where if either player gains life points while it's on the field, you can make either player gain 1,000 life points. So, one of the problems Hummingbird has is that it kind of requires other support to make its summoning cost easier. And thankfully, it does have really good other support to bring it out easier. But Freezing Fire is even better because it can bring itself out. If you're playing a deck that's just trying to get life points every turn, Freezing Fire's special summon effect will be activated by just doing your normal strategy, which is better than trying to do something like Generation Next into a Neospace and Air Hummingbird out of your deck. And then, if you're getting life points every turn, you just get an extra 1,000 on top of it during both players' turns. So, gaining 2,000 life points during yours and your opponent's turn, it will be 500 less than Neospace and Air Hummingbird getting 2,500 off of a 5-card hand. But your opponent's not going to have a 5-card hand for very long. So over time, Freezing Fire will be giving you more life points than Hummingbird, and it's a much easier card to keep alive since its stats aren't pathetically weak. But there's still not anything good either, to be honest. So it does absolutely require protection, just like Air Hummingbird. But it's much easier to bring out and could potentially gain more life points, which is why it's a little bit higher. Additionally, this card can be used in Nurse Burn decks too, since it can cause your opponent to gain the life points every turn. Although Nurse Burn decks generally try to win in one turn, so they probably wouldn't play this card. And at number 2, we have Munin the Runic Wings. This card has the effect to gain 1,000 life points during each player's end phase. And it has 2,000 defense, so right off the bat, it's the same amount of life points as Freezing Fire every turn, while also being much more survivable and not requiring any other triggers in order to gain that 1,000 life points. And funny enough, Munin is actually easy to bring out because it's a runic monster. And every single runic quick play spell card in the game has an effect to bring out this card or use its normal effect. So since its archetype can bring this card out as easily as breathing, it's probably one of the easiest cards to bring out on this list. And the archetype is actually pretty good too, with its main field spell constantly being hit on the ban list. Additionally, the card has other effects, where you can banish this card in order to negate the effect of a card that targets a runic card on the field, in addition to having an on-summon effect where you can search out a runic continuous spell which no one really uses. But as far as life point gain goes, you can't really get better than Munin the Runic Wings, unless you're looking to gain an insane amount of life points every turn. And at number 1, we have Cauldron of the Old Man. This is a continuous spell which allows you to gain life points or deal damage to your opponent based on the number of counters it has, where it gains 500 life points for each counter, or it deals 300 damage to your opponent for each counter, and on activation it places one counter on it immediately, and then gains an additional one during each of your standby phases. And the important thing to know about this card is that it doesn't consume the counters when it uses its life point gain or burn effects. So, on your first turn you can gain 500 life points, on your second you gain 1,000, on your third you gain 1,500, fourth turn 2,000, and so on and so on. The longer you manage to stall out, the higher the amount of life points you can gain every turn becomes, already outpacing Munin and Freezing Fire after only 3 turns. And it doesn't require you to special summon any monsters to the board. You just have to hard draw into this card and then place it on the field and start using it. It also doesn't require any other cards to work like Ebon Sun or Soul Absorption, as it is completely self-reliant and self-sustaining. Additionally, since it has the option to deal burn damage, at a certain point you can just use the card to win the game too, by just burning your opponent for the counters instead of gaining life points. This card basically does it all. It is easily the ultimate life point gain card, since it gains you the most amount every turn, and even has the option to just win you the game on its own. Sometimes when you're playing Yu-Gi-Oh, you want to gain just any amount of life points in the most efficient way possible, in the quickest way possible, and all during your main phase 1 or before. In this incredible hypothetical situation that will probably never happen, what are some of the fastest ways to gain life points without hampering your deck too much? And at number 10, we have Ghost Sister and Spooky Dogwood. This card is kind of like the maxi of life point gain, as you send it from your hand to the graveyard in order to gain life points equal to the attack of all effect monsters your opponent summons during this turn. Well, during the main and battle phase, because it does have some restrictions, along with the fact that it cannot be activated during the end phase, and the fact that it has a negative clause, where if you do not gain any life points from its effect, you actually lose half your life points. Now, this card is more about quick life gains during your opponent's turn, where if you need to gain some quick life during your opponent's turn, this is probably the only way to do it. And it's pretty easy to accomplish because most meta decks special summon effect monsters. Additionally, if your opponent decides to go hog wild with summoning, you'll gain an astronomical amount of life points during that turn. And at number 9, we have number XX, Utopic Dark Infinity. This is a generic rank 10 monster which has the effect where once per turn you can select another special summon monster you control in order to gain life points equal to its attack. And this is a rare once per turn effect on an Xyz monster which does not require you to detach a material in order to use the effect. So as long as you have Dark Utopic out, every turn you can just gain an extra chunk of life points based on the attack of special summon monsters you control. It does have another effect though, which is basically like Vampire Baby, where if it destroys the monster by battle, it can special summon it by detaching one of its materials. And with 4000 attack, it's pretty easy to get the effect off. If anything, I think this is one of the strongest monsters in the game natively, which has the Vampire Baby effect. Although we don't care about that for this list. All we care about is the fact that it's a generic extra deck monster, which can gain you life points. So if you're playing a deck that goes into level 10 monsters easily, which is basically just Tistina, Eldritch, and Trains, then this is the card you want in order to gain some quick life during your main phase, the criteria for this video. And at number 8, we have Ancient Fairy Dragon. This is a generic level 7 synchro monster which has the effect where you can destroy all field spell cards on the field, then gain 1000 life points. Then add a field spell from your deck to your hand which has a different name from the field spells destroyed. So if you have access to a generic level 7 synchro monster, which is pretty easy with Destrudo or Revolution Synchron, and also play field spells, then this is the extra deck monster of choice in order to gain some quick life. However, this is an incredibly narrow amount of decks which can actually take advantage of this. However, if you do take advantage of it, Ancient Fairy Dragon is also an excellent combo extender, because it additionally has an effect to special summon a level 4 lower monster from your hand at the cost of giving up your battle phase. Going into a generic level 7 synchro monster is easier than going into a generic rank 10 Xyz monster, which is the only reason it's slightly higher in this list, though still not quite as easy as some of the higher spots. And at number 7, we have Cyber Angel Natasha. This is a level 5 ritual monster with really low stats for its level, at only 1000 attack and defense, which allows you to, once per turn, gain life points equal to half the attack of one of your monsters. Additionally, it can negate the attacks of monsters that your opponent uses to attack your rituals, and it also has a graveyard effect to tribute a Cyber Angel monster in order to special summon itself from the graveyard to then take control of one of your opponent's monsters. And it's this last effect that allows this card to see competitive play in ritual decks that make use of the Cyber Angel engine, which is the case for a very competitive past deck called Drytron, which would definitely take advantage of Cyber Angel Ben 10 in order to search out a whole bunch of fairies during its turn. A deck that would naturally go into Natasha as well because it allowed you to steal your opponent's cards. The fact that it had a life gain effect was completely irrelevant, but naturally they would use the effect anyway just to gain some extra life because it was a nice bonus on top of its other effects. So if you're playing a ritual deck and need some quick life, there is Natasha as an option, since most ritual decks have a lot of generic searchers that basically search for any ritual monster, but obviously not all of them. And at number 6, we have Neo Space Connector. This is a normal summonable monster which has the effect to special summon a Neospacian monster from your deck on its normal summon. And the card of choice for this list is obviously Neospacian Air Hummingbird. This card simply has the effect where once per turn you can gain 500 life points for each card in your opponent's hand. So if used on your first turn, assuming your opponent still has 5 cards in their hand, you can gain 2500 life points right there. Additionally, you'll then have 2 monsters on board that you can use to start plays if you wish. Now, normally, Neospace Connector is used to bring out Neospacian Aqua Dolphin, which is sometimes used in some border-centric decks, or was before Isolde was banned. So if you wanted some ways to gain quick life, you could just substitute your Neospacian Aqua Dolphin for Neospacian Air Hummingbird, and then gain quick life that way. And at number 5, we have Agave Dragon. This is a generic Link 4 monster, which requires any 2+ monsters except tokens for its summon. And then if you have any worm-type monsters in your graveyard on its summon, you can gain 400 life points for each and every one of them. So if you simply have 1 worm monster, then you can gain 400 life points, which is actually pretty easy because there's a couple of decks that already natively use worm extra deck monsters. Outside of the obvious archetypes like Sword Soul, which is all about worm monsters, Branded also has Mirror Jade the Iceblade Dragon, and any deck that likes to run Super Polymerization has Mud Dragon of the Swamp. However, if you're just playing a normal deck that doesn't have any of these monsters, you can still find a way to gain the 400 life points if you simply play something like a generic Link 3 monster, and then just use it as a Link Climate material to go into Agave Dragon. Depending on how many generic worm monsters you play in your extra deck, you can gain even more life points from Agave Dragon hitting the field. So even if you just simply play one of them, that's enough to gain at least 400 life points. and it's probably one of the easiest ways to just gain any amount of life point in the average deck that's able to climb into a Link 4 monster. However, going into a Link 4 monster is very difficult for a lot of decks, so it doesn't quite make it at number 1, even if it is probably the most generic way to get quick life out on this list. And at number 4, we have Salamangreat Mirage Stallion. This is a generic rank 3 Xyz monster, which allows you to tap one of its materials in order to special summon any Salamangreat monster from your deck. And what you do with this is special summon Salamangreat Paro to the field, which can send itself to the graveyard to gain 2,000 life points. So if you have the availability of going into generic rank 3 monster, Salamangreat Mirage Stallion is an option to grab Paro from your deck in order to gain a cool 2,000 life points. It also helps that Salamangreat is a pretty decent deck, or at least used to be. So for a time when Salamangreat was still in the limelight, it just straight up had it in archetype option to gain quick life points during the main phase, which was actually used competitively a few times. But even though Salamangreat has been power crept, the option is still available because Mirage Stallion is a generic rank 3 monster for some reason. And at number 3, we have DDD Vice King Requiem. This card has a couple of interesting effects, but the main combo you need to know with it starts with a searcher called Dark Contract with the Gate. This is a continuous spell card which simply allows you to add a DD monster from your deck to your hand once per turn, which you use in order to add Vice Requiem to your hand. Then you set Requiem into the Pendulum Scale in order to use its effect to destroy the Dark Contract card in order to special summon itself. Then you can use it as a material in order to go into DDD Divisor King Des Machinae, which has an alternative summon condition where you can just simply use a triple D monster you control as its full material. Then Requiem has an extra effect when it's being used as an Xyz material, where you can return a Dark Contract card from your field or graveyard to your deck in order to destroy one card in the field and gain 1,000 life points. Now, this may seem pretty extensive as a combo, but actually this is a 1-card combo, which does not use your normal summon and does not lock you into anything. So if you simply just draw into Dark Contract with the Gate, then you have this entire engine live, and you're free to do anything else you want with your hand or deck afterwards, while also being able to destroy the card and gain 1,000 life points. And more importantly for this video, you can target any card on the field to destroy, which does mean your own or even itself. So you can always guarantee to get the 1,000 life point gain as long as none of the combo is interrupted by your opponent. This is probably one of the easiest and actually good ways to add life point gain to a deck, just as long as they're able to afford 4 main deck spaces for the 3 Dark Contract cards and 1 Requiem, and 1 extra deck space for Machinae, a small engine which has been used competitively in some decks. And at number 2, we have Curious the Lightsworn Dominion. This is a Link 3 monster, which on summon allows you to send any 1 card from your deck to the graveyard. So if you simply add Skullmark Ladybug to your deck, you can use Curious in order to send it from your deck to the graveyard in order to gain 1,000 life points. Now, what this means is that any deck which has the capability to go into Curious also has the ability to instantly gain 1,000 life points as long as you have a single Skullmark Ladybug in your deck. So what are the requirements to go into Curious? Well, it's actually kind of difficult, as it requires 3 monsters with the same attribute but different types. Now, most archetypes will have a series of monsters that share either a type or attribute, or a combination of the two. In fact, it's incredibly common for decks to share both type and attribute between all their main deck monsters. But that wasn't the case for every single archetype or even engine. You see, there's this engine called the Danger Engine, which is great for drawing through your deck pretty quickly and getting a whole bunch of cards in your hand to the graveyard. And the Dangers are all dark attribute monsters, but also each one is of a different type and can special summon themselves from the hand. So anyone who has the availability of the Danger Engine can easily go into Curious the Lightsworn Dominion and gain its effect. However, that's not the only deck which is capable of going into Curious. Currently, Curious is banned in the TCG, but in Master Duel and the OCG, where it's still legal, you can still see it in variants of Spiral and even Dragon Link, as they have tons of ways to get materials on the board, and also a lot of extra monsters which can match the requirements necessary to bring out Curious. Even some variants of Snake Eyes have the necessary requirements to bring out Curious. Basically, all of the Link Spam decks can easily bring out this card. So if you just need an easy way to gain some quick life, Curious is the best way to go into it as long as you side in a single copy of Skullmark Ladybug. And at number 1, we have Gigantic Sprite. This is a generic rank 2 monster which has the ability to special summon any level 2 monster from your deck, which is kind of an unprecedented amount of search power for a level, which gives you a huge wide range of targets to go into, especially since Gigantic Sprite also has an alternative summon condition where you can treat the Link 2 monsters you control as if they were level 2 for its materials. So if you have the capability of going into 2 Link 2 monsters, you can go into a gigantic sprite, then the target of choice for this video, which is Red Resonator, as Resonator has the ability where if it's special summoned, you can gain life points equal to the attack of any one face-up monster on the field, which also allows you to target your opponent's monsters, or even itself if it's the only card left. Basically, as long as there is a monster in the field, Red Resonator will be able to gain life points. And if Gigantic Sprite is brought out with an extra deck monster as one of its materials, its original attack will be doubled. So you can actually just target Gigantic Sprite in order to gain 3,200 life points, which is also the largest chunk you can gain out of all the cards on this list so far, minus the numbers 9 and 10 spots, which is why Gigantic Sprite is at the top of this list. All you have to do is just go into 2 Link 2s if you don't play level 2 monsters, or even less if you do have level 2 monsters available, as you can then just bring out Red Resonator in order to gain a whole bunch of life points, which was definitely something that was done competitively back in the day, and even sometimes to this day. In this video, we're going over some of the worst cards which technically allow you to gain life points. And at number 10, we have Muscle Medic. This is a 2200 attack level 4 monster, which is important because that's way higher than normal, where it has the ability that, if a player would take battle damage from this card, they instead gain that much life points. So if this attacks over one of your opponent's monsters, then they're just going to be continuously gaining life points, which isn't good for you, as you kind of want to make your opponent's life points go down and not up. Now, there are some decks which specialize in increasing your opponent's life points, more specifically Nurse Burn decks. And Nurse Burn decks have 2 cards which make it so any life points your opponent gains instead inflicts an equal amount of damage to them, which turns cards like Gift Card, a card which seems like it would be useless on surface level because it just gives your opponent 3,000 life points, actually a good burn card because 3,000 life points is a huge amount to burn in one go. However, Bad Reaction to Samachi and Muscle Medic literally just allows the card to function like normal, and isn't a real benefit. There are other cards with 2200 attack that are level 4 with negative effects, like Goblin Elite Attack Force, so there is a precedent set for this. Its effect is not unusual, as the whole point of these high attack low level monsters is to find some way to circumvent their negative side effects. With Goblin Elite Attack Force, what you can do is just play cards like Skill Drain or just negate its effects on the field, or Final Attack Orders so that it's always changed back to attack position. With Muscle Medic, it also benefits under Skill Drain since it negates its negative effect, and you can also use Bad Reaction to Samachi in order to allow it to deal damage like normal. Alternatively, you could just give this card to your opponent and just attack into it with a 0 attack monster in order to gain 2,200 life points every time you did that. I'm not sure if there's a deck that could actually do this to advantage, but for the most part, Muscle Medic kind of came out way after high attack, low level monsters were meta relevant, as it came out in 2017. So it never saw any competitive play, and is not really worth running in any kind of actual deck. Although its usefulness is pretty obvious, so it's still better than everything else on this list, kind of. And at number 9, we have Griffin's Feather Duster. This card simply has the effect where you can destroy all of your spell and trap cards in order to increase your life points by the amount of cards destroyed times 500. So if you destroy your entire back row, including your field spell card, you gain 2,500 life points, which is a lot from one card, but not a lot for going -6 in card advantage. And if that were the end of Griffin's Feather Duster, it would definitely be the worst life point gain card in the game. However, floating effects exist, and Griffin's Feather Duster activates his life point increase effect at the same time as its destruction, which means it doesn't cause cards like Gear Town to miss timing. Gear Town is a field spell card, which has the effect where you can special summon an ancient gear monster from your hand, deck, or graveyard once it's destroyed on the field. Although Gear Town's effect is a when effect, which means it misses timing super easily. If you use a card like Storm, which also has the effect to destroy all of your spell and trap cards in order to gain a beneficial effect, Storm does cause Gear Town to miss its timing, because after it destroys your spell and traps, it then counts the number of cards you destroyed in order to destroy the same amount of your opponent's spell traps. And since those effects do not happen simultaneously, Gear Town misses the timing to activate its effect. Not with Griffin's Feather Duster though, because the life point gain happens as soon as the cards are destroyed without any delay. And purely because it doesn't cause cards to miss timing when its effect is used to destroy them, it does actually have some use, even if the life point gain is pretty minor. It's just there's also better cards which can also do the same thing, like Double Cyclone, or just archetype-specific cards meant to destroy Gear Town, like Ancient Gear Catapult. And generally, archetypes which have spell and trap cards that float will have archetype-specific cards in order to destroy them, so that you don't need cards like Griffin Feather Duster. So it hasn't really seen competitive play, but it does have a niche use, even if there are technically better cards that can kind of do the same thing. And at number 8, we have Genis, Lightsworn Mender. This card has the effect where during the end phase, if a card is sent from your deck to the graveyard by a Lightsworn effect, you can inflict 500 damage to your opponent and then gain 500 life points. Now, the Lightsworn archetype has this little gimmick where during the end phase, they send a number of cards from the top of your deck to the graveyard as part of their effects during the end phase. And this is beneficial because the Lightsworn decks like to have their cards in the graveyard in order to activate a lot of their effects. And it's also just really good in other decks that like to put monsters in the graveyard. So Lightsworn engines have been played inside other decks basically since they came out. And Lightsworns are one of the few archetypes which constantly has seen competitive play over the years. However, Genis is one of the very few main deck Lightsworn monsters from the first wave of Lightsworns, which neither sends cards from the deck to the graveyard, or provides you advantage when sending cards from the deck to the graveyard. There is Wolf Lightsworn Beasts, which also doesn't have an ability to mill cards, but has seen competitive play pretty much since it came out, because it directly benefits from being milled from the deck to the graveyard. Genis simply deals a little bit of damage and gains you a little bit of life points, if it's on the field while your other Lightsworn monsters are sending cards to the graveyard. It also has an incredibly low attack point value at only 300, and it doesn't special summon itself like Wolf, so you have to spend resources to get this card on the field. Then you have to find a way to get in defense position so it's not immediately destroyed by your opponent just breathing on it. And since it doesn't directly contribute to a Lightsworn's win condition, i.e. getting a bunch of cards in the graveyard, and in fact requires you to go out of your way to bring it on the field, it's easily one of the worst Lightsworn monsters. But I'm sure most people forget it's even part of the archetype. Even though it's one of the original Lightsworns, the fact that it also gives you a minor life point increase is why it's on this list. And at number 7, we have 7. This has got to be the shortest name of any card in the game, as it's literally just the number 7. And the fact that this card is the number 7 spot on this list is purely coincidental. It just kind of fits at the spot. Because you see, this card is definitely worse than the first 3 cards we've talked about, but it's also kind of better than the next 6. As what this card does is if you have 3 copies of this card face up on your side of the field, because it's a continuous spell card, you can then draw 3 cards and then destroy all 3 copies of this card on the field. And the card has an additional effect where, if this card is sent directly from the field to the graveyard, you get to increase your life points by 700. So, the effect sounds pretty good on paper. If you get 3 of these cards in the field, you get to draw 3 cards. So it's a pure 1-for-1 in card advantage, which would also net you 2100 extra life points in the process. However, getting 3 specific continuous spell cards on the field is difficult, because spell cards are some of the hardest cards to search out in the game, and expending resources in order to get this card on the field easier kind of defeats the whole purpose of the card. And there is no accumulative advantage you gain. You either get all 3 on the field and gain their benefits, or nothing. If you have 2 of the cards in the field and you're just waiting for the 3rd one, then you're basically just at a -2 in card advantage with those 2 cards, not really advancing the game state. However, if they're destroyed, you get some life points, which is a nice consolation prize. But it's not really the good effect, because unless your opponent destroys the card for you, then you have to spend resources trying to destroy the card if all you want are those life points, using something like Griffin's Feather Duster, for example. But if you're just very lucky, and you know you can open up all 3 copies of these in your starting hand every time, then it's a pretty good cycling card through your deck, while also giving you extra life points. Which is why it has a slot machine in its card art, because that's not very likely. And at number 6, we have Fushi no Tori. This is a spirit monster which has the effect that when it inflicts battle damage to your opponent's life points, you gain an equal amount of life points as the damage inflicted. Now, this effect on the surface is fine. However, it's attached to a low-statted spirit monster, which makes it kinda bad. You see, spirit monsters are this type of card where they all share the distinction that they can't be special summoned, and they return to your hand during the end phase of the turn that they're normal summoned or flip face up. And both of those restrictions are really bad. Like, the card needs to be amazing to be worth being played. And there have been a number of really strong spirit monsters in the game's history, like Yatagarasu or Tsukiyomi. Although Fushi no Tori has an effect that's alright, which is just straight up bad on a spirit monster, where their effects need to be above average to be worth being played. You could attach this effect to just a regular level 4 monster with 1200 attack and it wouldn't see any competitive play. It being attached to a spirit monster is much worse. And at number 5, we have Muyen Curry. This card simply has the effect where you can choose one player in order to increase that player's life points by 200 points. So, if you have bad reaction to Samachi on the field, then you can use this card to inflict 200 points of damage to your opponent. or just give yourself 200 life points. It's also one of the few cards in the game which specifically designates that you target a player, which means you can use cards like Mystical Rough Handle in order to reflect it to a different player. Although there are a lot of cards which technically target a single player, which can also be reflected with Mystical Rough Handle. It's just Muyan Curry is one of the few which makes it so easy to see if Mystical Rough Handle actually works on the card or not. Now, the only problem with Muyan Curry is the fact that its effect is incredibly underpowered. It's basically the least amount of life points you can gain from a singular card, whose effect is purely to gain more life points and do nothing else. So, it's a -1 in card advantage for 200 extra life points, which is generally not worth a trade-off, and why it makes it on this list. And at number 4, we have Graceful Tear. This is a trap card which has the effect where you can add one card from your hand to your opponent's hand in order to gain 2,000 life points. So, it's a -3 in card advantage for 2,000 life points, as you lose the card Graceful Tear itself when it goes to the graveyard, you lose one card from your hand, and your opponent gains one card in their hand. And since the card doesn't affect the game state other than increasing your life points, it's just a lot of negative card advantage for a life point boost. There is actually another card in the game called Side Effects, which is a potential -4 in card advantage, although at least that card allows you to gain 6,000 life points for doing that effect. So Graceful Tear definitely seems like it's one of the worst life point gain cards in the game, and on surface level, it definitely is pretty bad. However, there are some cards in the game where it doesn't matter who activates them, as it affects both players equally. Think of cards like Cup of Ace. This card has the effect where if you flip a coin, then if the result is heads, you get to draw 2 cards. If the result is tails, then your opponent gets to draw 2 cards. The player who activates the card doesn't get to choose which result they want to pick, so technically it doesn't matter which player activates the effect, as you always have a 50% chance to draw 2 cards. So if you give your opponent a card like Cup of Ace, and then they just use the card, then regardless of the result, it's like you didn't lose any card advantage at all. It can also be used in order to thin out your opponent's deck by tricking them into using cards which mill a lot, with cards like Pot of Desires. This is a card which allows you to banish 10 cards from your deck in order to draw 2 cards. If you're playing a mill deck, a deck which is trying to make your opponent run out of cards in their deck, giving your opponent a copy of Pot of Desires in order to activate the effect of Graceful Tear is equivalent to milling 1/4 of their deck if they actually use it, which is a huge amount to mill for a 2-card combo. What I'm trying to say is there are some uses to giving your opponent a card in their hand, and the amount of life points you gain is enough where it's not insignificant, but it's definitely not enough where the card is trying to offset its downside too heavily. The card is in this weird place, where it seems like the card was made bad on purpose, but it actually is a little bit more useful than what a normally useless card would look like. So, it's still on this list. There are ways to use it to advantage, but none of them are super competitive or even super practical, but it's not completely useless either. And at number 3, we have the Immortal of Thunder. This is a flip effect monster which has the effect that you gain 3,000 life points when it's flip face up. However, it has a negative effect where if this card is sent from the field to the graveyard, you lose 5,000 life points. And this negative effect is worded in a way where it's very hard to circumvent that effect. If you increase your life points by 3,000 with its full effect, and then give control of the card to your opponent with something like Creature Swap, you'll still take 5,000 points of damage after it's sent to the graveyard. And the 5,000 life reduction is done in a way where it's not technically dealing damage to you, so you can't reflect it to your opponent with something like Barrel Behind the Door. In fact, one of the only ways to actually avoid the downsides of this card while gaining its upside is to flip it face up and then use it as an Xyz material for an Xyz monster. Because Xyz materials are sent to the graveyard are not counted as being sent from the field to the graveyard, so it's not impossible to circumvent its downside, but it's so impractical to try to flip this card up and then use it for an Xyz summon that the card itself is just kinda bad. The net amount of life points you lose from this card is 2,000, although it's possible to lose 5,000 life points without ever gaining the 3,000 life points if the card is simply destroyed while it's still face down before it has a chance to be flipped face up, which is how most flip effect monsters are destroyed in the modern metagame, and that's kind of the reason why flip cards don't really see competitive play outside of Subterrors. And at number 2, we have Hysteric Fairy. This monster has the effect where you contribute 2 monsters on your side of the field to increase your life points by 1,000. This card was released in the early days of the game, and having 1800 attack baseline, it was actually played as just a high-statted level 4 fairy monster. And generally, high-statted level 4 monsters had negative effects attached to them, whereas Hysteric Fairy's negative effect was just having a bad effect that didn't actually impact the card unless you choose to use it. So if you just completely ignore the effect of the card, it was basically a vanilla beater. Although, going based on the actual effect of the card, attributing 2 monsters to increase your life points by only 1,000 is not very good either. There is the fact that this card does not have a once per turn on this effect, so if you have a way to get out a whole bunch of cards in order to activate this card effect, you're better off just using Cannon Soldier in order to actually win the game instead of just increasing your life points for no reason. And the reason offering 2 monsters as a tribute for only 1,000 life points isn't very good is because you have to spend resources to get monsters on the field in the first place, and monsters themselves are a valuable resource. So tributing a card for an effect is one of the harshest costs a card can have. So it better be worth the effect of actually doing it. Kind of like how spirit monsters have to have good effects in order to be worth playing because they're so detrimental. And there are some really good cards which have tribute costs, like Monster Gate or Lone Fire Blossom. Since the act of getting life points itself is incredibly minor, as far beneficial effects go, tributing 2 monsters for such a minor effect is just way disproportionate to the cost for its benefit, which is why it's so high on this list. And at number 1, we have Princess Pikaru. This is a 2000 attack level 4 monster, which is pretty high for a level 4 monster, although that does come at the detriment where this card cannot be normal summoned or set, and it can only be special summoned with the effect of Trial of the Princess. And the card on the field has the effect where during each of your standby phases you gain 800 life points for each monster you control. Trial of the Princess is an equipped spell card which can only be equipped to 2 specific monsters, where it has the effect to grant them 800 attack, and as a condition where, if the monster is equipped to destroys the level 5 or higher monster by battle, you can then tribute the equipped monster in order to special summon from your deck Princess Pikaru or Princess Kura, depending on which of the 2 cards you had this card equipped to. And that condition is actually pretty tough to pull off, since it requires your opponent to have a level 5 or higher monster in the first place. Then you have to destroy that level 5 or higher monster with a monster that probably only has 2,000 attack. And bringing out Princess Pikaru is definitely not worth the effort of even trying, as it just gives you life points in your standby phase based on the number of monsters you control, but not enough where it's worth going through all that effort. In fact, there are very few life point gain cards in the game that are worth going through all the effort to gain their effects, as the whole act of gaining life points isn't actually very beneficial. Although explaining why is a very long topic, which I do cover in a different video, suffice to say, gaining life points doesn't really advance the game state, and you only need 1 life point in order to win. So if bringing out a card whose whole benefit is just gaining you life points, and it's incredibly convoluted to bring that card out, then it's probably not very good. Normally, cards which increase your opponent's life points have the effect as a detrimental drawback, because it's tied to some other kind of stronger effect. And usually, cards that only have the effect to increase your opponent's life points were meant to be purely detrimental, except when comboed with 2 very specific cards. So in this list, we'll be looking at some of the cards which are really good and give your opponent life points, or just give your opponent a whole bunch of life points. And at number 10, we have Dark Cure. Dark Cure is a continuous trap card which has the effect that every time your opponent summons a monster, your opponent gains life points equal to half the attack of the summoned monster. But if your opponent summons multiple monsters at the same time, then they only gain life points equal to 1 of them. The effect is not once per turn, so theoretically, this card has the potential to give your opponent the most amount of life points out of all the cards on this list. However, this is entirely dependent on your opponent performing an action, so it can't really be controlled. And if you're playing a Nurse Burn deck using cards like Bad Reaction to Samochi or Nurse Burn Reficule, your opponent can counter the card by not summoning any monsters. Although most strategies do need to summon monsters in order to do things, so chances are it might actually be pretty useful in those kinds of decks, even if there's slightly better cards you can use instead, which would probably take up some of the higher spots on this list. And at number 9, we have Soul Taker. This is a normal spell card which allows you to destroy 1 monster your opponent controls, then your opponent gains 1,000 life points. And this card has actually seen competitive play over the years, specifically because it's one of the few cards in the game that allows you to just target 1 monster of your choice to destroy that doesn't lose you any card advantage. Soul Taker is a straight upgrade over something like Tribute to the Doom, and gives you more control of which targets you can destroy than something like Fissure or Smashing Grounds, 2 other cards that saw competitive play over the early days of Yu-Gi-Oh! Because they traded directly 1-for-1 with your opponent's monsters. And while Fissure and Smashing Grounds don't lose you card advantage either, they don't allow you to pick which monster you're destroying. So the targeted nature of Soul Taker has always been pretty good. It's a little bit power creep nowadays, especially with Raigeki being unlimited at 3 copies, but it does remove the card from the field and give your opponent 1,000 life points, which might be useful in a Nurse Burn deck. And at number 8, we have Upstart Goblin. This card simply allows you to draw 1 card, then gives your opponent 1,000 life points. and this effect is absolutely amazing. Running 3 copies of Upstart Goblin in your deck basically means you can just run a smaller deck, since it just straight up replaces itself upon resolution of its activation. And your opponent only gains 1,000 life points in the process, which is laughable as a detriment to this card's effect. That's why Upstart Goblin has been limited in the TCG for so many years, and was even limited in the early days of Yu-Gi-Oh! Because even back then when life points mattered a little bit more, early Yu-Gi-Oh! Realized the power of Upstart Goblin being at 3 copies, because of just the consistency boost it provided any deck. However, sometimes the 1,000 life points it gives your opponent was enough for people to not play the card, even in decks which would be really good, because sometimes there are decks that are trying to OTK their opponent by inflicting nearly exactly 8,000 points of damage, so they can't really afford any card that increases their opponent's life points by any measure, even if the rest of the deck is full of cards that do nothing but draw cards, like Golden Bamboo Sword Engine or even Dark World Dealings. And at number 7, we have Chicken Game. Chicken Game is like the field card version of Upstart Goblin, as once per turn you can pay 1,000 life points in order to activate one of its 3 effects. And one of those effects is to draw 1 card. And another one of its effects is it allows you to give your opponent 1,000 life points, which is what allows it to technically make this list, even though it's probably never used for that effect. Its most useful effects are usually the ability to draw 1 card, or its second effect, which simply allows you to destroy the card, as both players are able to use this card's effect once per turn. And the reason a player would want to destroy this card is because it also has another passive effect, where the player with the lowest amount of life points doesn't take any damage at all. So you actually can't beat your opponent if Chicken Game is on the field, unless you beat them with a whole bunch of damage all at once. Chicken Game is currently banned in the TCG for its insane draw potential, as the card is also only a soft once per turn, as many people can see in Master Duel where it's currently unlimited at 3 copies and played in a whole bunch of Exodia decks. And at number 6, we have Snatch Steal. This is an equip spell card which allows you to take control of one of your opponent's monsters, and the drawback to Snatch Steal is that during each of your opponent's standby phases, they gain 1,000 life points. Snatch Steal is a really overpowered card that has a hilarious drawback that's not even that bad, because the ability to unconditionally take any monster your opponent controls is a straight +2 in card advantage, as your opponent is simultaneously losing 1 resource while you gain another, and gets around a lot of monster protection effects, save target immunity. And it doesn't have any limitations on the card you can steal like a whole bunch of other, more modern mind control cards. And it even allows you to use the effects of the monster you steal. So you can just take your opponent's big boss monster, then just use its effect, or get rid of it with some kind of extra deck summoning, after you've used it to attack for damage. Snatch Steal is easily the best card on this list, but the amount of life points it gives your opponent is only 1,000. And this list is more about giving your opponent life points than it is about cards which just happen to give your opponent life points. But the card giving your opponent 1,000 life points every turn potentially is actually pretty decent as far as giving your opponent life points over a period of time, and would unironically make it a pretty decent option for Nurse Burn decks. And at number 5, we have the Paths of Destiny. This is a gamble card which requires both players to toss a coin, and if a player gets heads, then they gain 2,000 life points. If they get tails, then they take 2,000 points of damage instead. Now, the balance when it comes to dealing damage to your opponent's life points with a single card is that a card should deal less than 1,600 points of damage, otherwise you can FTK your opponent with your opening 5 cards in hand. So, any singular card that's able to deal 2,000 points of damage by itself, without requiring other cards to combo with it, has the potential to be really game-breakingly good, which is why it's supposed to be balanced by the gamble nature of it. If the gamble goes off correctly, your opponent takes 2,000 points of damage, then the card is excellent in value. If the gamble goes poorly for you, then your opponent gains 2,000 life points instead, which is supposed to be a huge detriment to yourself. But maybe you can gain 2,000 life points in the process as you get a chance to gamble too. In a Nurse Burn deck though, it's just a pure 2,000 points of damage to your opponent no matter the result. So it's a staple card in decks that are trying to give your opponent life points through card effects because it easily clears a threshold of 1,600 points of damage. And there's also the possibility that you just get an extra 2,000 life points out of it for yourself, which could just be a neat bonus on top of burning your opponent for a ton of damage. And at number 4, we have Try and Guess. This is a trap card which has the effect where you get to declare 1 extra deck type of monster. Then both players reveal their extra deck, and whoever has more monsters of the declared type gains 3,000 life points. However, the card was made before Link monsters were added to the game, so it only allows you to choose Fusion, Synchro, or Xyz monsters. So if you want to guarantee that your opponent gains 3,000 life points, you can just stack your extra deck with nothing but Link monsters, and then just call one of the other 3 types that you think your opponent might have at least 1 copy of. A lot of meta decks will play Synchro or Xyz cards, so you might want to wait in order to call one of those, because if neither player has any of the cards of the declare type, then neither player gains any life points and the effect just kind of fizzles out. So it has a chance of failing and giving your opponent life points, but if it does succeed, then it can give 3,000 points of life point gain to your opponent, which converted into damage due to the effects of Samochi or Nurse, easily clears a threshold of 1,600 points of damage. In fact, it's almost 2 times the amount. Cards were really not balanced around dealing 3,000 points of damage to your opponent, which is why it's so rare that there's just unconditional cards that give your opponent a whole bunch of life points, because it gives actual power to Nurse Burn decks. And at number 3, we have Gift Card, a trap card which gives an unconditional 3,000 life points to your opponent, and it's just a better try and guess. Gift Card is easily the best card in Nurse Burn decks, and is kind of synonymous with them because if you draw 3 copies of Gift Card, and either of the 2 cards which convert your opponent's life point gains into damage, then you can win with 4 cards in your starting hand, completely ignoring the 5th or 6th depending if you go 1st or 2nd. Because resolving 3 gift cards is 9,000 points of damage to your opponent, and you don't have to worry about any kind of extra deck state like with Try and Guess. Although, since it's 1,000 over, you can also win if you just have 2 copies of Gift Card, and then a single Paths of Destiny, since that comes out to 8,000 points of damage exactly. So, if you get any combination of gift cards, Try and Guess, and a single Paths of Destiny, you can burn your opponent with 4 cards in your opening hand for an instant OTK, which is why Nurse Burn decks are kind of powerful as far as gimmick decks go. Especially if you build your whole deck around just trying to get some of these cards out, which is even easier since they're all normal trap cards that can be searched with Trap Trick or Lilith. The next 2 spots on this list are not better than gift card for Nurse Burn decks, but they do give your opponent more life points in a more controlled manner, so they are technically better at giving your opponent more life points, even if gift card is the king of just unconditionally giving your opponent a whole bunch of life points at once. And at number 2, we have Psychic Eraser Laser. This is a normal spell card which is kind of like a power crept version of Soul Taker, as what it does is allows you to send one of your opponent's monsters to the graveyard that was special summoned from the extra deck, where afterwards your opponent gains life points equal to either its original attack or defense, depending on whichever one of those is higher. The thing that makes Psychic Eraser Laser so good is the fact that the effect does not target, nor does it destroy, which means you can use Psychic Eraser Laser to get rid of normally indestructible extra deck monsters. And a lot of those indestructible extra deck monsters have 3,000 attack, or sometimes they might even have higher values. So because Psychic Eraser Laser has the potential to give your opponent more than 3,000 life points, and also has a really good effect tied to it, it's slightly higher than Gift Card, even if Gift Card is better in Nurse Burn decks because it's easier to use. And at number 1, we have Smile Universe. This is a quick play spell card which allows you to special summon as many of your pendulum monsters from your extra deck face up as possible, but then your opponent gains life points equal to the original attack of all the special summon monsters. However, all the monsters special summoned have their effects negated, and you can't summon other monsters or attack during the turn you activate the effect. And since it's cheating out extra deck pendulum monsters, the cards do need to go to zones that Link monsters are pointing to, thanks to Master Rule 4 restrictions that were not lifted on pendulum monsters. But even if you only have 3 zones to point to, there are some pretty high attack pendulum monsters in the game, and you can easily give your opponent more than 8,000 life points with a single resolution of Smile Universe. So, if, for whatever reason, you were playing Bad Reaction to Samochi or Dark Lord Nurse Rafikiel in a pendulum deck, you could easily get more than 8,000 points of damage to your opponent with Smile Universe. So, Smile Universe is technically the best card in the game that gives your opponent a whole bunch of life points, and you can directly control how many life points you're giving your opponent, rather than relying on your opponent to summon cards under Dark Soul. So it takes number 1 spot on this list, even though Gift Card is definitely the king of just giving your opponent an unconditional amount of a whole bunch of life points with no setup. Normally, life point gain cards are terrible, but if you happen to be playing a deck that regularly gets into high life point values, what cards can you play that actually take advantage of having high life points? That's the question we hope to answer with today's video. And at number 10, we have Child's Play. This is a continuous spell card which has the effect to gain 300 life points each time your opponent summons a monster. And if you have 10,000 or more life points, your monsters cannot be destroyed by battle. Now, there aren't really generic spell or trap cards in the game that make it so all your monsters cannot be destroyed by battle, as they're generally tied to very specific archetypes or conditions or just a single monster. And this one falls squarely into the conditions category of needing 2,000 or more life points than normal, which its first effect can help you get to after your opponent summons 7 monsters though, which means you're probably not going to get the effect off if you're letting your opponent summon 7 times on top of you. Now, there are situations in which this card's battle protection would be incredibly valuable, like if you're playing a stun deck and you want to make sure your little barrier statues aren't run over in battle. In fact, if Child's Play condition was only at 8,000 life points, it might actually see competitive play, just to give you an idea of how good that effect actually is. However, at 10,000, it's basically a gimmick, which is why you've probably never heard of this card, and why it's a great card to lead off this list with. And at number 9, we have Battle Royale Mode Joining. This is a continuous spell card which has the effect where every time you take damage during your opponent's turn, you get to special summon any level 4 or lower monster from your hand or deck, but then you lose 2,000 life points afterwards. So this is basically a full stop search of any level 4 or lower monster in your deck, which I might remind you, procs every time you take damage during your opponent's turn, and is not once per turn at all. This sounds amazing, being able to get out any low level monsters from your deck every time you take any kind of damage, all at the cost of 2,000 life points each. And this is exactly how it works. However, there's obviously a little caveat to this. It also works on your opponent every time you deal damage to your opponent during your turn. However, if you have no plans on ever attacking your opponent, like you're playing Runic or something, then this card basically only benefits you. Additionally, it has another good effect, where in order to activate this card, you have to target a face-up effect monster, where the first 2 times it would be destroyed by battle each turn, it's not. So you can use this on one of your floodgates in order to make sure it stays alive, and then use its other effect to special summon more floodgates from your deck if they happen to get rid of it. However, if they do manage to destroy the monster with the battle protection on it, they gain 2,000 life points. But if you want to gain 2,000 life points for yourself, you can target one of your opponent's monsters and then just destroy it by battle 3 times in order to get rid of it, and you'll be rewarded with 2,000 life points. So everything about this card is really good for decks that might want to gain life points, because they're generally only good in stall decks, especially since it can search out your other floodgates directly from the deck, or a Sacred Crane if you just want to draw a card. The only reason this card is so low on this list is specifically because the effect works on both players, so it might actually end up screwing you over if you're trying to push for game and your opponent keeps summoning monsters from the deck in order to block your attacks, and the fact it's really hard to trigger the effect yourself, as you can only summon monsters from your deck during your opponent's turn. And at number 8, we have Solemn Scolding. This is a counter trap card which can be used to stop basically anything your opponent tries to do. You can negate spells, traps, monster effects, and even the summons of monsters, all at the cost of 3,000 life points and having no other face-down spells or traps. Honestly, it's the restriction where you can't have other set spells and traps which prevents this card from seeing more competitive play. But even with a very expensive cost of 3,000 life points, it's still worth it because a full-on Omni-Negate that's completely generic is just worth the high life point cost. Although this one kind of cheats on the list a little bit because the effect is so good it just straight up sees competitive play normally as a tech option. But it's also good in decks that have lots of life points, because a mere 3,000 isn't going to set you back very far. And like I've talked about earlier, it works very well with floodgates because they're all face-up cards, and if this is your lone back row, it's probably going to protect them from something like a Harpy's Feather Duster. Honestly, floodgates and life point gain is probably the only way to actually pull it off. So a lot of these earlier cards are just combos with floodgates pretty much. And at number 7, we have Mechlord Emperor Grinnell. This card can be special summoned from your hand if one of your face-up monsters is destroyed by a card effect and sent to the graveyard. And this card has the effect where it gains attack and defense equal to half your life points. Additionally, it has some other effects where it can absorb synchro monsters and gain their attack, but that's rarely relevant. The main reason for including this card is because if you have ridiculous amounts of life points, this is a very easy to summon monster that can gain a whole bunch of attack points based on that. There are a handful of other cards in the game which gain attack based on having more life points than your opponent, like Mars, Neo-Parshath, and Ancient Sacred Wyvern. But they all specifically require you to have another card on the field in order to gain the extra attack, like the Sanctuary in the Sky in the case of Neo-Parshath and Mars, or just are hard to summon synchro monsters like Ancient Sacred Wyvern, which specifically requires a light tuner monster as one of its materials. Out of all the monsters that gain attack based on having a high amount of life point value, Mechlord Emperor Grinnell is the only one that's actually easy to summon, and doesn't have any other restrictions on gaining the attack. If simply one of your monsters is destroyed by a card effect, it comes out from your hand, and then if you have 10,000 life points, it will have 5,000 attack. And you don't need to have the Sanctuary of the Sky on the field, and you don't need to run a cumbersome light tuner monster. And at number 6, we have Dark Snake Syndrome. This is a card which has the effect where both players take 200 effect damage during each of your standby phases, which is doubled on each following standby phase. So after 6 turns, this card will deal 12,600 points of damage, which will usually result in a tie. That is, unless you have a ton of life points, in which case it's just on out for 6 turns until the card deals 12,600 damage to your opponent. which is actually 2 turns faster than using Wave Motion Cannon, and almost as fast as trying to win with the effective Destiny board. And with Dark Snake Syndrome, you don't have to protect 5 other cards. But with Wave Motion Cannon, you don't have to increase your life points, which is usually why it's the preferred method for stall burn decks. Because the reason Dark Snake Syndrome hasn't really seen competitive play is specifically because it deals more than 8,000 damage to yourself as well as your opponent. And there's no way to prevent this other than stopping the damage with a card effect, or having more life points than your opponent, which is the whole point of this list. And at number 5, we have Gale Dogra. This is a level 2 monster which has the effect where you can pay 3,000 life points in order to send a monster from your extra deck to the graveyard. An important thing to note is that the effect is not once per turn. Now, there are a ton of cards in the game nowadays which have effects that are activated immediately upon being sent from the extra deck to the graveyard. And also a ton more Fallen of Albaz cards which activate during the end phase to give you advantage. So, baseline, Gale Dogra can be used to pop a card with Natis, search a ritual card with Herald of the Arclight, draw a card with Garura, or siege your graveyard with future pops thanks to the Fossil Fusion cards and win Pegasus. So, if you just use this for the Albaz advantage, you can gain a ton of cards during the end phase. But if you don't run any of the Albaz cards, you still have the option to gain advantage with Garura, put Win Pegasus in the graveyard to deter your opponent from destroying your cards, or even go into the Shadow Engine by sending App Cologne to the grave to search out Schism in order to go into Window on the next turn. Or if you're playing a ritual deck, you can use it in order to search out 3 ritual spells or monsters of any variety from the archetype, which is just an amazing amount of search power that one card can give you. The only problem with Gale Dogra is that you can only use the effect twice normally, and it's kind of unsearchable outside of some gimmicky sprite combos. But it did see competitive play because just sending 2 cards to the grave is worth it to try to get it to the field. And if you have a ton of life points, you can gain even more advantage. And at number 4, we have number 35, Ravenous Tarantula. This is a generic rank 10 monster which has the effect where all monsters you control gain attack and defense equal to the difference in your life points with your opponents. They can also inflict 600 burn damage to your opponent each time they spell summon a monster, and you can detach material to destroy all of your opponent's monsters who have less attack than this card's. Now, at the number 7 spot on this list, we had Mechlord Emperor Grinnell because it was an easy to bring out monster that could gain attack for having a high amount of life points. But Tarantula is able to give the extra attack for having a high amount of life points to itself and all your other monsters. So if you have a huge life point lead over your opponent, this card can turn even a normal summon Ash into an 8,000 beater. And the card is rather easy to bring out with the new Mother Spider Splitter combo. So it's not like it's even locked behind an exclusive deck, since the Mother Spider combo can be used in pretty much any deck that has the extra deck space. Although outside of the Mother Splitter combo, it is pretty hard to bring out, unless you're running a whole bunch of easily summonable level 10 monsters, which is not really the easiest level to special summon outside of Eldritch and Trains. But with its power, it's the ultimate boss monster of a life point gain deck, turning all of your other monsters into boss monsters alongside it. And at number 3, we have Ancient Leaf. This card simply has the effect where if you have more than 9,000 life points, you can pay 2,000 life points in order to draw 2 cards. Now, I'm sure most people who saw this video probably assumed Ancient Leaf would appear somewhere, because this is the card everybody talks about being broken if they ever make a life point gain archetype too consistent. Because you only need to have 1,000 more life points than your starting total in order to have this card live. But if you do, you won't be able to use subsequent copies because then you go down to 7,000. Normally, the 2,000 life point cost would be a huge deal, but since you need to have a whole bunch of life points in order to use it anyway, that part is kind of negligible outside of just allowing you to chain multiple copies in your hand too easily. But if you have a ton of life points at all times because you're running some kind of life point gain deck, then every copy of Ancient Leaf is basically a pot of greed. A card that's currently banned because it's just too good at allowing you to dig through your deck to get more cards. And if you start a game with more than 8,000 life points, like in say a tag duel, Ancient Leaf is just a really good card for being a +1 that doesn't really negatively impact you, like a Pot of Desires or Pot of Extravagance might. And at number 2, we have the Aroma cards. The Aroma Mages are an archetype of monsters and spells and traps, which all have effects that gain life points and have effects that activate when you gain life points. However, we're going to be focusing specifically on 3 cards. Those being Aroma Mage Jasmine, Aroma Safari Sweet Marjoram, and Dried Winds. And specifically these 3 cards because they all have really good effects that activate if you just gain any amount of life points once per turn. With Jasmine, if you gain any life points, you get to draw 1 card, and the effect is only a soft once per turn. So if you have 3 copies of Jasmine on your side of the field, each time you gain life points on yours and your opponent's turn, you'll draw 3 cards, which is probably the best way to gain advantage off of having more life points, because drawing cards is just one of the most premium effects. which is why we had Ancient Leaf at the previous spot, which simply drew you 2 cards for having a lot of life points. Then we have Dried Winds, which is a continuous trap, where the first time you gain life points during your turn, you get to destroy 1 face-up monster your opponent controls. Unfortunately, the effect is mandatory, so you don't get to choose which proc of life points will destroy your opponent's card, unless you're able to choose how you gain your life points. So, if you have Dried Winds on the field alongside Child's Play, the first time your opponent summons a monster, for example, you'll be able to destroy that monster. And being able to actually impact the field by getting life points is pretty important, which is why we also have Sweet Marjoram on here, because she has the same effect, except it allows you to destroy any card instead of just your opponent's monsters when you gain life points. Aromaseraphy Sweet Marjoram is a level 6 synchro monster with generic materials, which can actually search out Dried Winds on its synchro summon, and when your life points are higher than your opponent's, it can't be targeted by card effects. Going into a generic level 6 synchro is not the easiest thing in the world, but if your only goal is to get out this card, you can simply run the Assault Mode engine to get it out with a single summon of Psy Reflector off of an emergency teleport, or by using the Punk engine. Now, there are other Romage cards which have effects that proc when you gain life points, like Rosemary, which allows you to negate a face-up card effect after it gains life points, but none of them are as useful as Jasmine, Marjoram, and Dried Winds, since they all impact the game just so much more directly and for more advantage than all the others. And their effects don't require their archetype to work, and can just be used with any deck that gains life points. However, Dried Winds is the only one that doesn't require you to use a normal summon or other resources to bring out, so that's the only one that's easily slotted into a life point gain deck to gain advantage. And finally, at number 1, we have Backup Squad. This is a continuous spell which has the effect where each time you take 1,000 points of damage, you get to draw 1 card for every 1,000 points of damage you took. This card is not once per turn, and that's very important because let's use Lava Golem as an example. If you give your opponent Lava Golem and then they attack you directly for 3,000 points of damage, you'll be able to draw 3 cards off of it because you draw 1 for every 1,000 points of damage you take. Then, if you have 2 other copies of Backup Squad out, you also draw 3 cards for every copy of Backup Squad. And then, say your opponent also attacks with a Kaiju, the weakest one that only has 2,200 attack, in which case you'll be able to draw 2 cards from your Backup Squad, even though you've already drawn 3 from Lava Golem. Because it procs every time you take damage, the card is just an insane advantage machine. So much so that if you're running a deck that has a lot of life points, and you have Backup Squad on the field, your opponent will probably just never attack, because the amount of advantage you gain from Backup Squad would just be ludicrous. It's one of the few cards in the game that can rival Max C in the amounts of cards you draw on a turn, and it's only limited by the fact that you kind of need a lot of life points for it to work, and it's really easy to destroy in the back row if your opponent just wants to not have to deal with it. But the fact that this is such a priority target to be destroyed just proves how good it is, and why it's easily the best card to use if you have a bunch of life points, because nothing draws you more cards than Backup Squad. In today's episode of Failed Cards and Mechanics, we'll be going over life point gain cards, explaining why they don't really see play, why they occasionally see competitive play, and also going over specific examples. When it comes to playing Yu-Gi-Oh!, being able to win the game is the #1 priority of your deck. In order to win the game, you want to either get your opponent's life points to 0, make your opponent lose every single card in their deck, either through a card effect or with just Victory Dragon, being able to win the game without ever having to do a game at all. So disregarding the Victory Dragon win condition, if your deck doesn't try to accomplish getting your opponent's life points to 0, mealing their deck, or winning through an alternative win condition, then your deck's not going to be successful. So while there are cards in the game which inflict damage to your opponent's life points, like Chain Strike and Magical Explosion, which are able to do so to great effect, there are also cards which allow you to gain life points, like Golden Ladybug or Supremacy Berry, which can't really be used to good effect. You see, the whole reason Chain Strike and Magical Explosion see play is because they can allow you to get your opponent's life points to 0, and you can build an entire deck around trying to get them to really high numbers of dealing damage. Chain Strike deals 400 damage times the chain link that the card is activated after. So if you're able to get a high chain link by just drawing a whole bunch of cards, with stuff like Jar of Greed or Accumulated Fortune, while also activating other burn cards, you have a viable way in which this is trying to get your opponent's life points to 0 while maintaining card advantage. Magical Explosion allows you to deal 200 points of damage to your opponent for each spell card in your graveyard. So if you're able to get 15 spell cards in your graveyard and then use Life Equalizer, you can burn your opponent for 3,000 points of damage in order to reduce their life points to 0. However, if you activate Supremacy Berry in order to gain 2,000 life points, you're not really moving the game state towards being able to win with that. All you're doing is losing card advantage to gain a little bit more life points. and you only need 1 life point remaining in order to win. When Solemn Judgment first came out, it didn't really see widespread competitive play, even though it's one of the best trap cards ever released in the game, and is one of the few trap cards which continues to see competitive play in the modern era, where almost no one plays trap cards that you can't activate from your hand. And part of the reason it didn't see a lot of play at first was because it requires you to pay half your life points, which was thought of as just too harsh of a cost, for only the effect of being able to negate pretty much one of anything your opponent happens to do, except a monster effect. Solemn Judgment can negate a spell, trap, or monster summon, which is so incredibly useful that all those effects are good, and being able to get 1 key combo piece can win you the game. However, older Yu-Gi-Oh! Was more slower pace. Usually you'd win the duel by slowly attacking your opponent's life points over the course of a couple of turns, and being able to OTK your opponent was not common. Nowadays, if you can't OTK your opponent in 1 turn, then your deck is doing something wrong. So when you could actually survive over the course of a couple of turns, having to pay half your life points to just trade 1 for 1 seems like way too much of a cost for such a minor benefit when they had powerful cards in the game which could trade for way more. So it kind of makes sense why it rarely saw play, but it still did see play nonetheless, as life points were just seen as more a valuable resource back then. Even then, they still didn't really play life point gain cards, except for emergency provisions, which was played for other reasons. I will say though, alternative formats where people play in legacy eras absolutely play triple copies of Solemn Judgment. They take modern deck building and apply it to previous eras, and have way better decks than ever existed in those time periods, just because they have years to know that paying half your life points to stop one thing is actually super good. Even if your life points kind of are more important in those legacy formats. You see, the thing with your life points is that it should be used as a resource in order to help you defeat your opponent, and not something you really need to try and increase. There are very few instances where gaining life points are necessary in order to further the game state. There are a couple of archetypes where they have a gimmick to gain life points in order to accomplish things, like auto mages, but gaining life points is kind of necessary in order to activate their effects, and not really the whole point of that archetype. Let's take a look at Grenmaju, for example. This was a meta deck which banished a whole bunch of cards really easily, which means they could make use of the card Soul Absorption. Soul Absorption allows you to gain 500 life points for each card that gets banished, and just resolving Pot of Desires would net you 5,000 life points with Soul Absorption. They could also banish 15 cards from their extra deck with Eater of Billions, and another 8 with Gizmek Orochi, so with just a single Soul Absorption, Grenmaju decks could easily gain over 20,000 life points by just doing their plays like normal. However, when Grenmaju was running around in the meta, no one played the card. It was probably one of the easiest ways to just gain a whole bunch of life points ever, way more than even Aro mages can do, and that's part of their whole gimmick. And it only saw play in 1 or 2 topping side decks, as a niche option to play against Mystic Mind burn decks, because if you just gain 7,500 life points with an Eater of Millions banish, they can't really burn through that. Although it was never played in the main deck, and wasn't even a popular side deck option against Mystic Mind burn in the decks that could play it. During the World Tournaments, they actually regularly banned Mystic Walk and Rainbow Life because of their availability to gain life points, and the potential for infinite loops. Mystic Walk allows you to tribute 1 monster to gain life points equal to its attack or defense. Since it's a quick play spell card, you can use it in response to your opponent trying to negate one of your monster's effects on the field, in order to dodge that negate and let it go off. Or just use it during yours or your opponent's turn in order to win through time rules, where whoever has the most life points wins. And Rainbow Life has a combo with Colossal Fighter that allows you to gain an infinite amount of life points. Although these cards don't really see play outside of World Tournaments, and them constantly being banned is more of a just-in-case procedure, rather than because of their actual problems. In Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Links, there have been a couple of times in which life point gain cards have been competitively viable. Back in the original version of the skill 3-star Demotion, you could use it once per turn in order to pay 2,000 life points to reduce the level of all monsters in your hand by 3, which meant you could normal summon level 7 monsters without a tribute. Now, skills in Duel Links add a dimension to the game that doesn't really exist in normal Yu-Gi-Oh! Because as long as you meet the requirements of that skill, you can use it whenever you want, without having to search for a card from your deck. And because you can always count on being able to use the skill, in order to make sure you could use it again on your next turn, since the starting life point value is only 4,000, was by playing life point gain cards like Supremacy Berry. Supremacy Berry allows you to gain 2,000 life points if your life points are lower than your opponent's, or else take 1,000 damage if your life points are higher than your opponent's. So the card would never really see play in the TCG because the only thing it does is gain you life points without being part of an archetype that can take advantage of its ability, and it doesn't gain enough life points, like Soul Absorption. Although this does allow you to activate 3-star Demotion again, so it absolutely saw all kinds of competitive play because the original version of that skill was one of the strongest in that game's history. Although that wasn't the only time pure life point gain cards were being played to great advantage in Duel Links. There's another skill called Extra Extra, which you could activate each time you lost 2,000 life points, where during your next draw phase, you would draw an additional copy of whatever card you just drew. And this skill was not once per duel, so it heavily incentivized constantly gaining life points, because you could directly turn each 2,000 points of damage into a +1 in card advantage. So Golden Ladybug was actually a key component of that deck, because it would cause you to gain 500 life points every turn, and you could sometimes make additional copies of it with the skill, which could result in you having 4 or more copies of Golden Ladybug in your hand, giving you 2,000 plus life points every turn. The deck would also make use of the field spell card, Temple of the Mind's Eye, so that you can never take more than 1,000 battle damage from any one attack, and the continuous spell card, Backup Squad, which could allow you to draw another card for every 1,000 points of battle damage you took. And the way you would win was by basically just milling out your opponent, with a copy or 2 of Hero Shadow Scout and Wormworm. The deck directly benefited from being able to gain life points, because you would gain advantage every time you lost 2,000. So it was in your best interest to just keep having more life points than your opponent could damage down, and you would just keep drawing into ways in order to stop your opponent from taking you out, thanks to stall cards. So this skill was eventually nerfed so that you could only use it once per duel, which was much more reasonable and completely stopped this life point gain deck. So it seems Duel Links had some success with pure life point gain decks, or just plain pure life point gain cards for their full purpose of gaining life points, because you could use those with skills in order to use those life points. This isn't really possible in normal Yu-Gi-Oh! If you want to stall out your opponent, it's much easier to just use something like Mystic Mine, or one of the plethora of stall cards available to the Final Countdown decks, where they don't even care about getting life points. Because getting life points in of itself doesn't advance the game state, unless you have some way to make use of those life points to advance the game state. That's better than everything else that can just do it already, which doesn't require you to pay life point gain cards. However, just like with extra decks and Duel Links, there is always the option of just gaining life points so that you can mill out your opponent. That could be seen as a win condition, just gain so much life points that your opponent can't possibly damage you enough before they run out of cards in their deck. And there's even cards which can help you accomplish this goal, like side effects, where your opponent gets to choose 1 to 3 cards to draw, and then you gain 2,000 life points for each card they choose to draw. So if your opponent draws 3 cards, then you gain 6,000 life points, which means your opponent's just that much closer to milling out their deck. You could even use cards like Graceful Tear, which allows you to gain 2,000 life points at the cost of giving 1 card in your hand to your opponent. So, if you give your opponent a copy of Pot of Desires, they'll be very tempted to play that card and mill 12 cards from their own deck, which is one of the largest mills you can accomplish with a 2-card combo. Although that relies on your opponent actually playing that Pot of Desires, and side effects is only useful if your opponent chooses to draw all 3 cards. So, they're probably not the best examples in the world, but definitely cards that allow you to gain life points while also helping mill your opponent. It's a deck I experimented with in the past, which I would definitely never call competitive, but it definitely could steal games occasionally from meta decks on the online scene. The thing is though, even those 2 cards are not enough life points. It's too easy for your opponent to just deal more than 8,000 points of damage in one turn, and side effects actually gives you a lot of life points from 1 card at 6,000. If you wanted to play an actual competitive life point gain deck, where you're just trying to out-survive your opponent's damage, you would need a way to gain over 10,000 life points every turn without losing very much card advantage, which currently isn't viable. So I guess the video should be about how life point gain effects are too minuscule for the TCG, and they don't allow you to gain enough to be worth playing, outside of a whole bunch of edge cases, like Mystic Walk being used to win in time, or Soul Absorption being used as a niche side deck option against Mystic Mind Burn. So personally, I'd like to see more incredibly bombastic life point gain cards, so that it could be a legitimate thing you can try out. It would probably be terrible to play against, since you can't really play a life point gain deck without it being a control stall deck, but as shown with Extra Extra, and even cards like Backup Squad, which basically allow you to convert high life point values into extra cards from your deck, or even Ancient Leaf, which allows you to draw 2 cards if you have more than 9,000 life points, there is cards which allow you to make use of high life points. They're just not good enough. And current life point gain cards don't outpace the amount of damage a meta deck is able to put on the board pretty easily. So unless an archetype directly allows you to gain life points as part of a gimmick, they're just not super useful effects to have, because they don't directly advance the game state, unless you're playing a deck that specifically uses high life point values to your advantage, which there aren't any competitive meta decks that do so, and the few in Duel Links which could were definitely nerfed because they were not intended to. In this video, we'll go over the 10 best cards in the game which have effects that increase your life points. And at number 10, we have Emergency Provisions, basically on here for historical reasons. This is a quick play spell card that allows you to send any number of your spell and trap cards you control to the graveyard in order to gain 1,000 life points for each card sent to the graveyard in this way. And one of the easy ways you could use this card in order to gain life points was to just send cards you had already activated that were going to the graveyard immediately anyway, as most cards don't need to stay on the field for their effects to resolve. So you could activate this at the end of a long chain to just gain life points off of all the cards that you're about to activate anyway. And you could also use it to send cards to the graveyard with negative effects that you don't want to go off. And this card was considered good enough that it was actually placed on the ban list and limited to 1 copy. But then they took it off very soon after, because here's the thing about life point gain cards: unless they do something else, they're not useful. A card which causes you to gain life points needs to do something else as well. Otherwise, it's not worth using, because just gaining life points for yourself doesn't really advance the game state, because it doesn't matter what your life points are, as long as your opponent's life points become 0. That's why cards like Solemn Judgment, a card that lets you pay half your life points to negate any one card, is considered so good, because the life point cost doesn't matter. As long as you have 1 life point, you can still win the duel. And the only use life point gain cards have are in decks that are specifically trying to gain life points in order to do something else, like Row Mages, who need you to gain life points in order to activate their effects. Or if you're using cards like Backup Squad, a card which can convert your high life point value into card advantage for yourself, as that will allow you to last long enough for your opponent to attack into enough times to draw enough cards. Or if you're using cards that increase your opponent's life points in order to convert it into burn damage, like with Bad Reaction to Samachi. Now, the only use life point gain cards have in the game are ones that coincidentally also do something else useful as well. In this video though, I'll try my best to stick to just pure life point gain cards instead of really good cards that just happen to have a life point gain component to them. And at number 9, we have Gingerbread House. This one kind of immediately breaks the rule I just set for myself, where I want to list pure life point gain cards instead of just cards with good effects that just happen to also gain life points, because this card kind of falls into that category. Because what it does is every turn during your opponent's standby phase, you can increase the attack of all of your opponent's monsters by 600. And then after you increase their attack, you can destroy all of your opponent's monsters who have 2,500 or more attack. So, if your opponent has 2 cards with 1,900 attack on the field, and then this card gives them 600 attack each, bringing them both up to 2,500 attack points, this card would then immediately destroy them for being at the attack power value. And then, if you destroy monsters with this effect, you get to gain life points equal to the number of monsters destroyed times 500. So, in my theoretical example, you would gain 1,000 life points for destroying 2 cards. Now, what's great about this card is that it just happens every turn without you having to really do anything else. So, if you're playing a stall deck, this card would eventually allow you to just destroy all of your opponent's monsters, as those monsters would eventually go above the 2,500 attack power threshold due to this card's effect giving them 600 attack every turn. And then, when it destroys cards, it also allows you to gain life points, which does actually synergize well with the incredibly few life point gain decks that are out there, which are basically stall decks trying to get high life point values for Backup Squad to give them more card draw. Although the life point gain feature of this card is nice, that's not really the main function of this card. It doesn't give you a whole lot of life points, which is why I put it at a low spot at number 9. Because it's still a lot better than most of the monster cards that give you life points, because a lot of those require you to use up your normal summon in order to use them, which automatically makes them worse than a spell or trap card like this, especially one that also just passively destroys all of your opponent's monsters. And at number 8, we have Cauldron of the Old Man. This card has an effect where once per turn, you can gain 500 life points times the number of counters that are on this card. And this card gains 1 counter as soon as it's activated, and then it gains an additional 1 during each of your standby phases. And what's great about this card is that the gaining the life points from its effect does not remove the counters. So, on your first turn, you can gain 500 life points with its effect, and then on your next turn, you can gain 1,000, and in the turn after that, you can gain 1,500, and so on and so on. As the longer this card stays on the field, the more life points you gain each turn when you use its effect. And you can also choose to use its effect to inflict burn damage to your opponent at a 300 point value per counter instead of 500. So if you had 3 counters on this card, it would inflict 900 points of damage to your opponent, instead of using its effect to give yourself 1,500 life points, which is not half bad. If you're running a life point gain deck, a card like this is infinitely better than something like Solemn Wishes, which only gives you 500 life points every time you draw a card, which is really limited in how many times it can give you 500 life points per turn. And then if you stall long enough, and this card has enough counters on it, you could just start inflicting damage to your opponent instead, and have a real win condition right there. This card is very vulnerable to spell and trap card destruction though, and doesn't really advance the board like Gingerbread House does, so it's not really the best card in the world, but it is a good life point gain card, which is why it makes it on this list. And at number 7, we have the Golden Ladybug. During your standby phase, you can just reveal this card in your hand in order to gain 500 life points, but then this card stays revealed in your hand until the end of the turn. Now, what makes this card better than cards like Cauldron of the Old Man or Solemn Wishes is that this card stays in your hand. So it's not vulnerable to your opponent's spell and trap card destruction or any other board removal cards. The only way your opponent can stop this card is by discarding it from your hand, which is an incredibly difficult and rare effect to have, that if your opponent could discard this card from your hand, they would probably choose a different target anyway. They could also use effect negation on it though, but who's going to use that on a Golden Ladybug? So, only gaining 500 life points per turn is not the best life point gain in the world, and Cauldron of the Old Man and Solemn Wishes have the potential to give you more life points per turn. The protection that Golden Ladybug has, i.e. being a card in your hand instead of one on the field, just makes it better if you're trying to passively gain life points every turn. The downside to this card is that it takes up a card in your hand in order to gain this incredibly mediocre effect, but this is a list about life point gain cards, so we're not really thinking about useful cards too much, at least not until we get to the higher spots on this list. And at number 6, we have Try and Guess. Now, this card has the potential to allow you to gain 3,000 life points, or force your opponent to gain 3,000 life points, both of which are good effects. Because what it does is that when you activate this card, you must declare one extra deck monster type, either Fusion, Synchro, or Xyz. Since this card was introduced before Link monsters, it doesn't actually allow you to declare that type of extra deck monster. And then, whichever player has more cards of that type in their extra deck will gain 3,000 life points. So if you want to gain 3,000 life points with this card, all you have to do is fill your extra deck with nothing but fusion monsters. And since you'll have 15 fusion monsters, 99% of the time you'll have more fusion monsters in your extra deck than your opponent, because the average deck plays a lot of Link monsters in order to allow themselves to have more extra deck spaces. Although honestly, since most decks run at least one Link monster, you could just fill your extra deck with Synchro or Xyz cards as well. And then as long as you just have 15 of either of those 3, you should be able to win the guess and gain 3,000 life points. However, if you want your opponent to gain 3,000 life points, because you're playing a bad reaction to Samachi deck, where it converts life point gains into burn damage, and 3,000 points of burn damage from one card is really good, then what you'd want to do is have only Link monsters in your extra deck, and then call either of the 3 extra deck types that you think your opponent might have. In which case, you might want to call Fusion monsters, because most players use Instant Fusion or Super Polymerization. Whatever you think your opponent will have in their extra deck, because as long as they have one of them, this card will treat your Link monster as if you had 0 cards, and your opponent will automatically win and automatically grant your opponent a win for having more of the declared type, and give them 3,000 life points, which you can then convert into burn damage if you're playing a Nurse Burn deck. This is one of the few Nurse Burn specific cards that is also just a good life point gain card for yourself. If you want a one card, gain a whole bunch of life points without any other kinds of gameplay restrictions type thing, as none of the other cards in the game give you as big of a life point boost without some other kind of setup or cost, besides setting up your extra deck before the game starts. As Try and Guess, at a 3,000 life point boost, makes it one of the highest ones in the game. Although since all this card does is give you life points, it's still not the best life point gain card, as the other ones at higher spots are just a little bit better. And also, some fun facts about this card: it's the only card in the game that forces your opponent to reveal their entire extra deck. And this card is also sometimes banned from World Championship tournaments, because of how easily this card can gain you a big chunk of life points. And funny enough, so is Mystic Walk, a quick play spell card that lets you tribute a monster in order to gain life points equal to its attack or defense. Both of these cards are usually banned from the World Championship tournament, specifically because of how easy they can give you a huge chunk of life points in one turn, in order to take advantage of the new time rules, where whoever has the most life points at the end of the duel, if time has run out, wins the last duel of that match. And at number 5, we have Soul Absorption. Now, while Try and Guess might be the highest life points you can gain from a single card without any kind of board or gameplay setup, as all you have to do is set up your extra deck before the duel starts, then Soul Absorption would be the highest life point gain card that does require you to build your deck around it, and doesn't require some kind of infinite loop, as this card gives you 5,000 life points if a card is banished, no matter how a card is banished, or whoever's card is banished. So, if you banish a card like Necroface, you'll gain 500 life points for that card being banished, and then Necroface herself has an effect that when it's banished, you can banish the top 5 cards of both players' decks, which would result in 10 cards total being banished, and then this card would give you 5,000 life points, because it doesn't care whose cards are getting banished, or from where. So, if you use a card like Eater of Millions to banish all 15 cards in your extra deck in order to bring it out, you'd gain 7,500 life points. If you banish 10 cards face down for the effect of Pot of Desires, you gain 5,000 life points, and so on and so on. This card allows you to gain a ton of life points for some really good banished cards, and the only problem with this card is that the decks that can allow you to gain a whole bunch of life points with this don't really care about having high life point values. Because sure, gaining 5,000 life points from a good card that people run anyway sounds like a good idea, but it's not enough life points to really be worth playing Soul Absorption. Because if your opponent breaks your board and destroys this card, that extra life point bubble might only buy you one turn of not getting instantly OTK'd, in which case you'd still be behind in the game state, and buying yourself an extra turn won't help you much more than playing a single copy of Threatening Roar would. High life point gains are only useful in decks specifically designed to take advantage of high life point values, using stuff like Ancient Leaf or Backup Squad. And since Soul Absorption is a hard to search out continuous spell card, you can't really rely on having Soul Absorption in those kinds of decks either. So while it may be a really good life point gain card, it's just not really useful in the kinds of decks that could allow you to gain the most amount of life points from it. And pure life point gain decks can't make use of this card either, as they don't really banish very much, but it still allows you to gain a ton of life points, which allows it to take a high spot on this list nonetheless. And at number 4, we have Checksum Dragon. This is a level 6 hand trap, where if your opponent declares an attack, you can special summon this card from your hand, and then gain life points equal to half of this card's defense, which is 2,400. And also, if this card is in attack mode, it cannot be destroyed by battle. So, by default, this card allows you to gain 1,200 life points. Now, that 1,200 life point value isn't the most useful thing in the world. However, here's what's so good about this card. It allows you to do something else beneficial in addition to gaining that life points, which is not half bad at an amount of 1,200, especially if you're in a deck that wants to gain incremental life point increases, while also having cards that are good at other things in addition to gaining life points. Because with this card's 2,400 defense power value, you can just activate this card once your opponent has low attack monsters left on their side of the field in order to block them out for the rest of the battle phase, gaining life points
And then you'll have a dark dragon type monster on your side of the field for the next turn, which is actually a good type and attribute to have. Alternatively, if you just want to lower the amount of damage you're taking for the turn, or if you want this card to survive to your next turn no matter what, you can place this card into attack position, and it will be guaranteed to survive the battle phase. You'll just get a little bit of extra life points to hopefully not lose to all the damage that's about to come in, as this card has really low attack, and be almost guaranteed to have the card in your next turn for a few extra deck plays. This is all actually pretty good stuff, especially since a similar card called Salamangreat Paro, which is basically an archetype-specific version of Checksum Dragon, where if your opponent declares an attack, you can special summon this card from your hand, and then it can change its attack power value to that of a Salamangreat monster in your graveyard. So if you had a really strong one in your grave, you could give this one a really high attack power value to basically block out the battle phase. Alternatively, you could then tribute this card in order to gain 2,000 life points, which is why people were using this card because of the new time rules. Checksum Dragon is better as a generic card because it doesn't rely on specific archetype in order to be useful, as it will gain the life points immediately with the baseline defense of 2400. It's much more likely to block out the rest of the battle phase if used at the right time, whereas Salamangreat Paro only has 2,000 base attack, and only gains life points if you specifically tribute the card during your next turn. Although, since Salamangreat Paro is part of a meta archetype, it sees more play than Checksum Dragon and is at least worth the mention. And at number 3, we have yugioh. Now this card is like a poster child for what a card that can gain life points should do in order for it to see any kind of play. Because what this card does is you can special summon it from your hand during the battle phase, just straight up. If it's the battle phase during either player's turn, and this card is in your hand, you can special summon it whenever you want. And you don't have to wait for an attack like you do with Checksum Dragon. And then, when this card is special summoned by its effect, you gain 1,000 life points. It's also a level 4 monster with decent stats for a monster that can special summon itself, at 1,700. Because usually monsters that can special summon themselves have really low attack power values. And it has a quick effect where it can tribute itself to increase the attack of another monster you control by 1,000 until the end of the next turn. So if you want to play a monster that gives you life points, you want it to be able to special summon itself in order for it to be of any kind of use. Unlike cards like Spicy Spy, who has the potential to give you more life points, but takes up your normal summon, or Neospacian Air Hummingbird, who has the potential to give you even more life points, but also has low stats and takes up your normal summon. Yugioh might not give you as much life points as those two cards, but it has better stats, can special summon itself, which is the big thing, and the life points it does give you is not half bad. A 1,000 life point boost is a pretty decent amount for all the versatility this card has, because that 1,000 attack boost it can give lasts for 2 turns, as it's until the end of the next turn. So if your opponent is trying to destroy this card with a card effect, you can tribute it in response to that destruction to boost up one of your other monster's attacks for 2 turns. Or you can bring this card out during your battle phase, attack with it, and then give one of your other monsters a boost so it can attack over something else. And this card actually saw competitive play during the early days of Cosmo decks, as it was used to boost up Cosmo Farm Girl, so that it could use its effect to add Cosmo cards to your hand, which you could then tag out for. In the current metagame, monsters that can special summon themselves are very valuable, but really only for being able to do it during your main phase 1, and since this card can only special summon itself during the battle phase, it's almost exclusively limited to decks that actually want it for its life point boost, or want it for the attack boost, or just want the versatility this card allows for having both of those things plus decent stats on the board. But either way, it's a really good card with a decent life point gain effect attached to it. And at number 2, we have Ghost Sister and Spooky Dogwood. Now, in order for a life point gain card to see play in decks outside of decks that are specifically trying to gain life points, they need to allow you to gain a ridiculous amount of life points during the turn under normal playing conditions. So, unlike something like Soul Absorption. And Ghost Sister and Spooky Dogwood is probably the closest card to accomplishing that goal than any other card in the game, as you can discard this card from your hand in order to gain the effect for a turn, where each time your opponent special summons an effect monster, you gain life points equal to those monsters' attack. So if you use this card at the start of your opponent's main phase 1, in response to a chain of something that's probably going to special summon a card, this can sometimes stop your opponent from doing any kind of combos they were going to do for the rest of the turn. because the amount of life points you gain from them going through a normal combo would be so much that it honestly gets people to think twice about continuing their plays for the turn. And if this card can gain you so many life points, where it can essentially shut down a player from doing anything for a turn, that's pretty good. But there is also a downside to this card that strongly encourages people to not do anything for the turn as well, where if you do not gain life points by this effect, your life points are instead cut in half during the end phase. So sometimes a player will choose not to do anything during their turn if you activate this card at the start of their main phase, just so your life points will be cut in half. This card is still one of the best life point gain cards in the game though, and it's probably the only life point gain card that sees play in normal decks, which is why it definitely deserves its high spot on this list, just not the number 1 spot, because nothing can really top the number 1. And at number 1, we have Rainbow Life, a card which is routinely banned every year from the World Championship Tournament. Basically, this card has the effect where you can discard 1 card, and then until the end phase, whenever you would take any kind of damage, you instead gain that amount of life points. So, if your opponent attacks you with a 2000 attack monster directly, and you use this card, you'll gain 2000 life points from the attack. And since your opponent can't inflict battle damage to you for the rest of the turn, it completely stops out a battle phase. Now, what makes this card better than something like a Draining Shield, which can also negate a monster attack and then gain life points equal to that monster's attack, without having to discard 1 card from your hand, which is actually a pretty big cost, is that Rainbow Life can be activated at any point during yours or your opponent's turn, whereas Draining Shield can only be activated in response to a monster attacking you. So if your opponent tries to clear your back row before they enter the battle phase, they can just destroy your Draining Shield and never have it trigger, whereas you could chain Rainbow Life to being destroyed in order to still gain its effect for the turn. Although its ability to stop attacks for 1 turn is not why this card is banned from World Tournaments. The reason this card is banned is because it can allow you to gain an infinite amount of life points, which really messes up tournaments that are trying to stick to a time schedule. And if you spend your entire turn just gaining an infinite amount of life points through a repeatable combo, then you could theoretically just stay on your turn forever, and your opponent would not be able to inflict enough damage to you in order to win. If you're able to bring out a synchro monster called Colossal Fighter, and your opponent has a monster that has a higher attack power value than it, your Colossal Fighter can just crash into that monster, destroy itself by battle, and then special summon itself from the graveyard immediately with its own effect, in order to infinitely crash into your opponent's monster, and then if you have Rainbow Life active, you'll just gain life points equal to that minor attack power difference. And you can just do this as many times as you want, and you'll have an infinite amount of life points. It's kind of like a legal infinite loop that does result in a change of game state, which is why they banned this card during World Tournaments, because I think someone did try this during one of the tournaments one year. I could be wrong about it though, but I'm pretty sure that's why they ban it every year, even though it's not really a viable strategy. And of all the cards on this list, only Rainbow Life is capable of allowing you to gain an infinite amount of life points, I think, which really does make it one of the best life point gain cards in the game.